Hardesty,
Here.
Udaley, Wheeler.
As per the rules, if there are no objections to Commissioner Fritz participating by phone, only by council members present, that would be me. I have no objections. If the legal counsel will please read the rules of decorum.
You don't have a quorum.
I got this, Joe.
No, you don't have a quorum.
Joe, I got this.
No, you don't.
Joe, be quiet or you
No,
will be removed.
you don't have a quorum. Where's the quorum?
I said silence. We are in process.
Not silence,
Legal
me.
counsel,
Where's
please.
the quorum? You need 3. Where's the 3? Come on, Joanne. You and I worked on the charter.
Darn it,
For God's
Joe,
sake.
I know what I'm doing. If you will keep your mouth shut, I will do what I need
No, I
to do.
won't unless you explain it. You got one person there. The rest of them are all out and about.
I'm gonna ask you again to be quiet or I'm gonna ask you to leave the chamber. This is your
Hey,
last,
throw me out.
This-
They said you don't have a quorum to do
this
it.
is your last warning.
Go up to the fourth floor and ask, what's her name?
Legal counsel, please read the rule of decorum, please.
She's,
Commissioner, I beg your pardon. I'm looking for the rules for the telephone. Sorry. May I go ahead and start the conduct during meetings while I'm waiting
That
for
is
those?
exactly the one I was looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum
Really nice to have somebody knows what the hell they're doing.
during city council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you're in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations, will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass.
Hey,
Thank you
there you go.
for helping your Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you so much. Caller, would you read the first communications, please?
okay, just Karen, are we good on the, on that piece for
Are we
the
good on the piece about?
teleconferencing? I
Thank
think we
you.
need to make that one statement,
All
Thank
right.
you, yes.
okay,
Okay,
now that we have a quorum. Yeah.
may I proceed?
Yes, please.
Thank you. If a council member is participating by telephone in the meeting, here are announcements that need to be made before roll call is taken. Circumstances constituting an emergency. Pursuant to PCC 3.02.025, Commissioner Fritz is participating in telephone today because of personal reasons. All other members have been given an opportunity to call in. If all other members of council are present, if other members of council are not present, Commissioner, or the mayor is also not physically present, but they were contacted and given an opportunity to participate by phone today. Do any of the council members who are physically present have any objection to Commissioner Fritz participating by telephone?
No. Thank you so much, and I apologize to the chamber for the slight insanity starting the process. Caller, would you please read item 117
Okay, and, let's see, and 118 requested to come up at
and
the same time.
118, they're coming together?
yes.
Okay.
117, request of Isabella Villarreal to address council regarding participatory budgeting. And 118, request of Tyler Wilkins to address council regarding participatory budgeting.
While they're coming up, I want to apologize for my tardiness. I had a meeting south of here, and it took a little longer than I thought to get back. So thank you all for your patience, and thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, for presiding.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, and just to even the playing fields, I find you to be a competent commissioner. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler and council, for this time to share our work and vision with you. My name is Tyler Wilkins. I'm the co-founder and advocacy director of Participatory Budgeting Oregon, a fiscally sponsored project of the No Agenda Foundation. So we founded in 2018 after discovering an immense interest in bringing PB to our region from over the 100 participants who attended our Participatory Budgeting Community Forum, a forum that was partially funded by the City of Portland. Since the forum, we've engaged in a grassroots campaign where we've continued to meet with electeds and staff, we've testified at council meetings and work sessions, and we've partnered with other community-based organizations where we've led workshops and worked to create a shared vision of economic justice in the municipal budgeting process. So I love thinking about the ways people can practice democratic self-governance. With participatory budgeting, community members get to come together and decide on the rules that will govern the process. And then through the process, community members co-create solutions to make their communities better and stronger. PB challenges the notion that solutions should come from a top-down approach. Instead, it nourishes the concept of grassroots democracy with a bottom-up approaches that identify people as experts in their community. And when we talk about centering this process on marginalized populations, we are recognizing that people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. When we lead with their ideas and voices, we'll build communities that are responsive and resilient. We're also forced to recognize how our current structures limit participation and new voices. They're hard to navigate, they're not very inviting, and they carry with them historical trauma. PB is also great because it brings democracy, decision-making on the ground, and meets people where they're at. I understand PB has considerable startup costs, but I see this as more than a capital investment in a process. It's an investment in a new style of governance where people are engaged more broadly and more meaningfully. To me, that's worth it. It's also the beginning of building a new equitable structure that will build up communities' resilience for generations to come. I appreciate you recognizing the power of this process, and I appreciate your continued interest. We had good conversations with commissioners and staff, and I just want to say our team will continue laying the groundwork for successful implementation, and I encourage the council to continue considering experimenting with participatory budgeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. My name is,
Move that closer if it's more comfortable.
okay,
It moves.
cool.
There
Ooh,
you go. Hey,
thank
fancy.
you. Fancy. Good morning. My name is Isabella Villarreal, and I am a youth leadership coordinator at a local nonprofit, as well as being on the steering committee for Participatory Budgeting Oregon as well. At Participatory Budgeting Oregon, we envision the state as a multicultural and multiracial participatory democracy that centers marginalized communities so that all of the state's diverse people know their individual and collective power. While youth engagement in PB is key to any successful municipal process, I'm specifically here to voice my support for a PB process that is centered on youth in order to allow for the clarification and prioritization of youth values. So until young people turn 18, they have no decision-making power in issues that affect them the most, from gun violence, the climate crisis, housing, transportation, the list goes on. Young people are taught about civics in classrooms, but aren't given the opportunity to actually engage in civics or the chance to vote on issues that directly impact them or others around them. A youth-centered participatory budgeting process strengthens high school civic programs by actually giving students the chance to take a meaningful step towards civic engagement while they are still in school. We believe that those that come from the community are also the ones that are most equipped to create the solutions, meaning students and young people know the impact of the issues they are facing the best and deserve to have an opportunity to change them as well. PB addresses the need for a youth representation by giving them real decision-making power within their community. Boston, Long Beach, California, and Seattle are prominent examples of youth municipal PB and has been implemented on hundreds of campuses. By giving youth the power to design projects, vote on where funding goes, and engage their peers and their broader community, we begin to not only listen, but actually actualize the priorities that young people care about, which are not often represented in the traditional budgeting process. There's a huge misconception that young people don't care, or if they are given decision-making power over, like in a budget, they will be frivolous with it. And time and time again, this has been disproven. For example, in Boston, students voted for fans in their schools so they could have AC, and adding solar panels as well. I work with many students who are under the age of 18, and they are extremely passionate, educated, and literally can't wait to vote. And PB is one way to actually actualize their civic engagement and engage their peers in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you both for testifying. I'm intrigued by youth-led projects, especially around budgeting. I would love to have more information about the cities who've tried this. And I don't know if you have web links or if you have data that you can drop off at my office. I absolutely agree that if we get young people engaged early on, they become much more informed voters when they are of age to vote. So I'm definitely intrigued by the idea and look forward to hearing more.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Commissioner Daly.
Thanks for being here. I just want to quickly say I'm also very interested in participatory budgeting. I think it would be an amazing thing for the Multnomah Youth Commission to tackle. However, we don't have any funding for that currently, nor do we have a pot of money to allocate, but it's been on our wish list, and we're going to be meeting, I believe, with members of your group, if not soon to talk about that. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I'd also like to hear more about what specifically you're proposing. I've been listening to your testimony previously, and I'm intrigued by it. I think it's a great idea. I will say there are actually several on-ramps at the City of Portland for youth to get engaged, and they're very engaged, particularly around school safety issues and certainly on climate action. And frankly, the cohort of youth today are far more engaged than my cohort ever was at their age, and they are in fact meaningfully shaping policy through the Youth Climate Council, Youth Commission, as you indicated, and independently through their own efforts. And if there's some way to engage youth in the upcoming budget process, I'd certainly be very interested in that. We have a number of forums that we do throughout the community. To be honest, they vary in terms of successfulness, in my opinion, in terms of really engaging the broader community. And I think it would be interesting to have a youth perspective included in those discussions. And so if there's some ideas.
Ooh, I like that. What if one of our budget forums we turned over to young people to actually help them engage in a kind of a dialogue about what the
I think it
choices
would
are?
be cool. I think it'd be great to do.
Love it.
Okay, you got some interest here. You heard it here. Heard it here first. Come talk to us. Let's see how we can make that work.
Great, thank you.
Right, thank you, appreciate your testimony. And the next one, let's see, I think we have, no, 120, please. Or did I skip 119? Sorry, 119, please.
119, request of Cheryl Graves to address council regarding Yes, My Life Matters, 400-acre lifestyle farm.
Cheryl Graves, I'm a resident of Portland, and
Morning,
first
Cheryl.
off, I have to commend you for your composure.
Thank you.
So today I'm here again to talk about the Yes, My Life Matters, the homeless cure, and how I plan to socially and financially support the 400-acre lifestyle farm. Before I begin, I would like to call attention to the importance of the plan. This plan has the capability to house and rehabilitate over 7,000 homeless and underachievers in the first 5 years. The only worthy plan out there is the Harbor of Hope, and they can hold up to 100 per night and up to 300 in a year, compared to their 1,500 compared to this 7,000 plan is gigantic. And then if you add that we have 38,000 homeless on top of that, what we have in order right now, what we're working in right now, can't even house the increase, let alone the existing 38,000. So obviously, we're in big trouble over that. So the Harbor of Hope and you, the city, could adapt this plan, My Life Matters, so that we can assure to end homelessness and not just provide another shelter, but rehabilitation as well. I think that they would marry well together. As I've mentioned before, I am looking for just the right groups or individuals to lead and support an end to Portland's homeless crisis. We plan to fund this project through, number one, business partnerships. We're not asking the city to fund it. We're just asking them to get on board and support it. Also, nonprofits, individuals like Portland Residents, Philanthropy, and foundations, and Portland Homeless Challenge, which you'll see coming up in your mailings for several walks in the downtown, very friendly walks about just recognizing the need to really take this on head-on and fix this issue. The business partners can open satellite stores within the village, offering on-the-job training in personal and trade skills. These newly gained trade skills will become a part of the villagers' employment resumes. The nonprofits will move their location to the YES campus, continuing their efforts directly to the villagers. Our group, YES, will join the existing nonprofits, thus gaining strength in numbers as well as passion. Individuals can join our mission by way of financial contribution, volunteer, and also employment positions. Philanthropists and foundations and people who are passionate about helping people in need fundraise and donate. Finally, Portland Homeless Challenge. The challenge group consists of everyone who works, lives, or plays in the downtown. These groups will be asked to contact and gather their brothers and sisters to join in the walk against homelessness. Now, how can the government help? I ask that you suspend your present efforts towards homelessness, saving millions, and shift those dollars to mental health and addiction. Those groups cannot help themselves. They need our help. By separating the mentally ill and addicted from the...
Thank you. And Cheryl, I actually do read your testimony.
Thank you.
If you want to give it to Carla, I'll make sure I read it.
Yes, I gave her a copy.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, please, is 120, please.
Request of Craig Rogers to address council regarding trust and local government. He contacted us. He's not able to make it.
All right, I'm sorry to hear that. Next up is 121, Mr. Herman.
Request of Stan Herman to address council regarding the corner of Mississippi and Interstate.
Good morning, Stan.
Actually, I wasn't going to be up here anymore, but I opted out the last communication, but I went online and saw my name on there, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to say, Amanda, Fritz, Hardesty, I want to thank you for meeting with me. I followed up on some of your advice, and we're going in the right direction there.
Excellent, glad to hear that.
So what I'm passing you out right now, this is a quick note. I've kind of showed you this before. Interstate and albino lot that I have. There was an old hotel located there years ago. I just want to share with you the site with you again, that for any housing needs, like short-term housing for camps like the Hazelnut Camp, or future long-term affordable housing units. My shared recovery housing business works. We are housing about 27 people, and it's an amazing program. So I just wanted to pass that information on to you if you want to forward it to any of the city planners to review it and want to talk to me about maybe something for the future, pass that on, and I'd appreciate it.
Excellent.
And thank you for your help.
Thank you, Stan.
Thanks, Stan. Appreciate it.
And, I have to say, what a difference just sitting down and having a conversation can make, huh? And you're saving your voice today, so you don't have to actually yell at us.
And it's funny seeing that picture on the wall.
Yes, it was, right? Have a great day. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Stan. Carla, have any items been pulled off consent?
We've had no requests.
Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Consent agenda is adopted. First time certain item 122, please.
Accept stipends task force report.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. This morning, we're going to hear a report on how city bureaus resource the Portlanders who volunteer their time and expertise to our many advisory bodies. This summer, Council directed the Office of Community and Civic Life, Office of Equity and Human Rights, Bureau of Human Resources, and the city's attorney's office to analyze the city's current policies and best practices for providing volunteer stipends. As many of you know, improving and diversifying the ways which Portlanders engage with the city and inform our decision-making is a topic of critical importance to me. There is a cost to civic engagement for community members. They give up time and money in the form of commute costs, parking, childcare expenses, and the value of their expertise to help the city provide the best and most equitable outcomes for residents. The resources it takes to participate mean that for some critical communities, the cost of participation is too high. That means that as a city, we are not doing all we can to hear from the full diversity of our community. And why that matters is that when we don't understand the unique needs and challenges in our community, we don't do a very good job addressing them. A stipends policy will not solve for all the barriers to serving on an advisory body, but it can reduce the burden and in turn expand the number of people and perspectives informing our bureaus. But first, we need an understanding of what the Bureau's current practices are and the relevant legal statutes. This is the next important step to diversifying the perspectives and expertise that advise city bureaus, and it's long overdue. And here, okay, I don't have the run of show, but here we have the Director of OEHR and Ashley Jaden from Civic Life.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners.
Good
My
morning.
name is Ashley Jaden. I oversee the Advisory Bodies Program. I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves as they speak. Our 4 bureaus were convened by a budget note tasking us with the topic of stipends. Today, we'll present emerging policy options, recommendations, and requests to return to you in May. The City of Portland has more than 100 boards and commissions. I've asked around a bit, and by comparison, most cities have between 20 and 30. I take this to mean we have an engaged city. If there's a topic, we have a committee for it. I took on this position because council wanted to know who made up these boards, who was missing, and why. At Civic Life, we see people in the city inherently want to volunteer. On advisory boards, they do multiple hour meetings in the evening. They take on homework, reading reports and data, and represent their neighbors to influence policy and fight for those who aren't at the table. Because of the Advisory Bodies Program, we instituted a process that members announce when they financially gain from a decision. But what about the people who are there because the decisions have historically harmed them and their communities, or who are there to reverse the impact that continue? I recently met 2 young women who aged out of the foster care system, Sage and Mary. Council, we are looking how we can make sure Sage, who juggled after-school sports, clubs, friends, can give her valuable perspective on the city services she uses every day. Sage and Macy run the Oregon Foster Youth Connection, a conference to develop foster youth leaders and empower them in civic engagement. I got to watch Macy in action on a state committee she serves. She travels to government offices and sits among agency experts, people with degrees and doctorates, and she discusses policy. As the committee analyzed data and numbers, Macy, the only young person on the committee, raised her voice to clarify the data. She shared her real-world experience in foster care and how the accounting looks different in the field. Macy receives a nominal stipend to reduce barriers and attend that committee. and I'm thinking there's something to emulate to attract her to ours. Macy and Sage juggle school, work, internships, while giving their free time to affect policy. They also train and mobilize other youth in foster care to do the same. We want Macy and Sage on our boards. We want the graduates of Oregon Foster Youth Connection on our advisory bodies. And if a nominal stipend will ease some of their burdens, then let's take that step. Our presentation will cover how an equitable approach leads to meaningful engagement, we'll cover legally informed practices, and we'll present bold recommendations. And I'll hand it off to Dr. Smith.
Okay. All
Thank you.
right, good morning.
Good morning.
Mayor, Commissioners. Markeisha Smith, Dr. Markeisha Smith, Director for our Office of Equity and Human Rights. So now that many government structures understand the value of community engagement and they welcome robust feedback from historically oppressed communities, there's an increased need to have these voices be an important part of our decision-making processes. And while government values these voices, we have not always thought carefully about the barriers that impede participation. Things such as transportation, family responsibilities, hectic work schedules, and I would say even more critically, the emotional impacts of sharing trauma that many communities have faced because of systemic oppression and government structures. So while we want to ensure that the voices of historically and currently oppressed community members are driving our policy, practice, and procedure, we have to make sure that we remove barriers to their participation. Ultimately, we have to invest time and resources into equity, and the work on stipends is just one slice of that pie. So thinking about our community members who we are saying have been overtapped, something to sort of think about. We acknowledge that in the past and often present, the practice of including community voices manifests as sort of a checkbox activity or exercise. We reach out to the same individuals who willingly come to share their experiences and perspectives as a representative of their community, while at the same time failing to recognize a tremendous amount of time, resources, and energy that these individuals give. This giving is most times offered without any expectation of reward or gift, and the giving is simply about a passion and commitment to improving conditions in their communities. It becomes our responsibility to recognize these sacrifices and respond accordingly. The stipend work provides us with this opportunity. And finally, we also want to acknowledge that Bureau's funding, revenue, resources are very different. As a leader for a small office with a large responsibility, I understand the strain on resources that conversations such as a stipend policy can create. But it's imperative that we consider equity and resources and ask the question, in what ways can we support bureaus and offices with not the same resources, because that would be equality, but rather how can we support bureaus and offices with the resources that they need in order to successfully implement this policy? And that is what we mean when we think about equity in resources across bureaus and offices. So with that, I will pass it to our legal team, Lori and Tony. And thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thanks for the presentation.
So Commissioner, I expect
Commissioner Hursti?
Commissioner Udell, I expect we're going to be able to ask questions from staff after all the presentations are done.
Yeah.
So no running away. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Lori Kraut from the City Attorney's Office. This is Tony Garcia and Lynn Vu, both attorneys from the City Attorney's Office. We're here to discuss the legal implications in City Council adopting a stipend policy for members of advisory bodies and commissions. We're not here to weigh in on the policy choices. So there are primarily two statutes that impact the analysis of providing stipends to volunteers. The first is the Fair Labor Standards Act. We commonly use the acronym FLSA. And the second is the Volunteer Protection Act. So I'm going to talk to you about the FLSA, and Tony's going to talk to you about the Volunteer Protection Act. So offering stipends to volunteers can get tricky under the FLSA because the city may inadvertently convert volunteers into employees. So first slide, please. So a volunteer must meet all of the bullet points on the slide. So their service, So their service has to benefit a nonprofit or a government agency. The volunteers cannot have been coerced into providing those services. The services are typically of what is generally considered to be volunteer work. Volunteers do not receive or expect to receive compensation. Their service is less than full-time, and volunteers are not replacing employees. The focus of my presentation is really going to be on this: volunteers cannot receive compensation or expect to receive it. So the next slide, please. This is the definition under the regulations to the FLSA. And again, it reiterates that the service must be for civic, charitable, or humanitarian reasons without promise, expectation, or receipt of compensation for services rendered. Next slide, please. Okay. So under the FLSA, the city may provide the following to volunteers. We can reimburse actual expenses. So if someone took an Uber to get to the meeting, we could reimburse that. Reasonable benefits might be providing food, providing child care, providing a bus voucher, something of that sort. And the language of the statute says, and a nominal fee. That's what we're referring to as stipend. But it has to be nominal, okay? So if you go to the next slide, please.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a definition of nominal?
There is not, but there is a safe harbor, so I'm going to get to that. All right, so what constitutes a nominal stipend? So number one, it cannot be a substitute for compensation. Number two, it cannot be tied to productivity. And number three, it complies with what the Department of Labor calls the 20% rule. So if the stipend is at or below 20% of the prevailing wage for that job, the stipend will automatically will not be considered compensation, and the volunteer will retain that status. Tony?
Good morning. Again, I'm Tony Garcia from the City Attorney's Office, and I'm going to talk to you about the Volunteer Protection Act and the Oregon Tort Claims Act. Those are referred to with acronyms as well, the VPA and the OTCA. So under the Volunteer Protection Act, that is a federal liability protection for volunteers that would cover board members and volunteers that serve the city. You'll find more in-depth information on pages 6 and 7 of your report. And the Volunteer Protection Act is important because it is broader and would provide greater coverage than the Oregon Tort Claims Act. So if we look at the Volunteer Protection Act, there is a limit of $500 that a volunteer can receive in order to maintain their status under the VPA. And that $500 is not only monetary compensation, but also going to include any benefits they receive. So that will be parking, transportation, childcare, food, etc. Under the Oregon Tort Claims Act, if we were to go above the $500 in benefits, volunteers would be left with having to obtain coverage for liability protection under the OTCA. And under that, a court would apply a test to determine whether the volunteer was acting as an agent for the city. So again, the VPA is going to provide greater protection because they're a volunteer, and so they maintain that status as long as they stay under the $500. In terms of legal risk, not paying volunteer stipends has the least amount of risk. But if City Council chooses to pay nominal stipends, there appears to be a legal path forward, although the pathway becomes more complicated and does involve risk. we can look to the FLSA, the VPA, and the OTCA as guideposts for use in making decisions if council chooses to move forward with providing stipends.
I have a question.
Commissioner Daly.
So it's my understanding that that $500 limit from the Volunteer Protection Act would include everything: food, transportation, childcare, and stipend. Is that correct?
That's correct.
However, under reimbursement of expenses, it says, in addition to nominal stipends, the city may reimburse volunteers. So that reimbursement can't be in addition to $500, it has to fall under that $500 cap.
So that's because there are two different issues at play.
Yeah.
So the reimbursements is under the test and the look under the FLSA, and the VPA is different.
But everything has to fall under the $500 cap is what I'm trying to,
If we want to stay with the VPA.
yeah, I think we do. And then the 20% rule was a new one to me, and that is interesting. Little hard to quantify what the pay would be since these are not jobs. But it seems that we could go with at least the minimum pay of $15 an hour and 20% of that. I mean, we don't have any jobs that we can compare these volunteer roles to set a wage.
I think we might have to look at this a little bit more in terms of trying to work with BHR to figure out, is there a job classification that really might fit within this, the scope of the work, and then figure out what is that wage and figure out 20% of that.
Okay.
But I would assume 15% would cause no trouble at all. Excuse me,
$15, yeah.
$15, 20% of 15.
So that would be a $3 an hour stipend.
Yeah, I'm saying, I think there may be a path where we could figure out what would be an appropriate job. Alternatively, if there is no job in the city that kind of fits what these members are doing, we are then allowed under the 20% rule to look at the market and still do 20% of that wage.
Okay. Great, thank you.
We have some more presenters from our group.
Very good.
So you're noticing by now that we're outnumbered by the lawyers. They got their own panel. I once wanted to go to law school, but then I thought after the stipends task force, I might as well jump straight to the bar. So our initial recommendations, developing a process. I recently met with Peggy Morales of Metro, and she did a happy dance because she's been spending the greater part of 3 years in the majority of her role trying to roll out their stipends policy, which is still evolving. And I understand they're still working on a pilot project as well. She commended us for starting with our legal counsel because they were important for us to understand what our restrictions were and also to prevent us from going down a path with community and making promises that we cannot fulfill. So our recommendation is that from here forward, we would develop the process based on the next one is asking you to base the stipend on the information that you've received. You've learned that we can go above what they can be protected under liability for, but that comes with some risk. So we ask that you set the basis for the stipend as we proceed forward in looking at this process. And finally, you've gotten some information about what would be included in that stipend. So our recommendation is that we track and report what benefits are being received. We know we have members that serve on multiple committees, and so reasonably so, if they're being offered or requesting a stipend on more than one committee, it's our responsibility to keep track of that, and if they go above a certain limit, to do accurate reporting of that.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. So not everybody who serves on the 100-plus boards and commissions needs a stipend. And so I would not want to set up a process where we were just automatically paying people for the privilege of volunteering with us. What are your recommendations as it relates to, because what I think you're trying to do is reach untraditional participants and support their ability to actually bring their full selves to a volunteer opportunity. I guess I should have asked the lawyers this, but what is your plan around, like, not around offering it in a way that we're making sure that, A, we're not actually making it uncomfortable for people to ask for it, but we are making it clear that people who don't need it should thank us but say no thank you, so that we have those funds for people who need it. Is there going to be a process as we roll this out that we're really mindful of how this is playing out?
Thank you for your question. I'm going to pass it off to Director Sukri, who has that in our next portion of our initial recommendations.
And if we advance the slide, you'll see that eligibility and priorities is a question that we've explored and also will ask of council.
Why don't we do this? Why don't you guys finish your, because I have a lot of the same questions Commissioner Hardesty is raising, but rather than interrupt the flow, why don't you finish your presentation and we'll write our questions down and then we'll have you come back up.
We're 4/5 of the way there.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead and
wonderful.
finish it up.
So good morning again. My name is Sukri. I serve as Director for the Office of Community and Civic Life. And I'm going to talk about three additional recommendations: a one-year pilot, eligibility and priorities, and also a stipend fund, as Dr. Smith was referring to get to more equity between bureaus. The one-year pilot, we know that the need is clear, it's long overdue, and we have a yes, we can orientation to this, and there are pathways to build. And we feel in order to equip ourselves for success, let's take this in a staged approach where we actually set the foundations and actually can proceed with confidence and with communities and with bureaus. So in the one-year pilot, thank you for the feedback during our conversations with council, we like to set up the process, develop shared tools and tracking, and we absolutely will identify issues and implementation that are going to be different than what we have projected in our planning today. And so that includes setting the basis of the fund amount, gathering requests for stipends, tracking all bureaus, and developing the tools and mechanisms to do that, creating and testing educational guidelines. Volunteer advisory board members should be informed. They need actually information to participate or decline or otherwise, and so we feel a one-year pilot will help us establish those important things. Secondarily, eligibility and priorities. Here we are going to share with you some of the eligibility and priorities that we set forth as initial recommendations, but the most important part of this presentation is that we have to keep in mind as we set eligibility and priorities so that they do not inadvertently discriminate, especially to protect a status. And so later on, when we ask you the question specifically, council's thoughts on eligibility and priorities, we're going to do that with the caveat that all of them need to be reviewed by legal counsel. So our baseline recommendation is that any volunteer advisory board member who is not compensated by another body is eligible. That's a baseline recommendation, but that there are also priorities. So limited resources can help set priorities. Some bureaus may not have, even if they have revenue, they may not have sources of funding that allow them to use it for this purpose. And so there might be, we're also recommending that council may set additional eligibility and priorities, and that bureaus can further set them unique to their situation. They could include, for example, people who do not have bus passes from work or school, people who have experienced homelessness or houselessness, and people who do not have flexible work schedules. Those are considerations that actually would not discriminate against any protected class, so there are ways to set those priorities, as Commissioner Hardesty has indicated, and we'd like to hear how you would like to set them. And then council could also set priorities for all advisory bodies that supersede bureau considerations. For example, you could set priorities for only advisory bodies that report to council, or advisory bodies, specific areas of work like houselessness. especially in the initial year. And then lastly, I'm going to speak to the stipend fund. So as we mentioned before, even if you have revenue, this might not be an eligible use for that revenue. And in many cases, people will not have resources in their budget to provide the stipend in addition to the attendance supports they might already provide for volunteers. General fund bureaus and offices have generally 1 to 4 advisory bodies, and typically the staff who work on them have several roles. And then, let me see. Also, we feel like a fund that is a citywide fund for bureaus to access also helps to curtail the inaccurate impression that some advisory bodies' work are more important than others. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tom, to talk about budget considerations.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Tom Schneider. I'm with the Bureau of Human Resources. Purpose of this particular section is just to give a high-level view of what the potential budget impact is of a citywide stipend program. And ultimately, what that looks like will be your discretion to help guide and determine what level we're proceeding with. So in terms of the overall, in terms of overall budget considerations, we wanted to provide some context there. Based upon the information we currently have, there's 4,000 advisory body positions citywide. So it's quite a large number of individuals actively participating in advisory bodies. As we discussed earlier, the total value of the stipend includes all reimbursements to an individual, such as the nominal stipend, food and transportation, and that's what we would recommend being included in that total dollar amount. What's important to note is that some bureaus already have budgeted for and provided food to some advisory boards. So there's existing money that's currently being spent on this activity. In terms of legal constraints, Sook has identified or had mentioned the restrictions on use of a bureau's specific funds in support of stipends. There may be sources of revenue such as grants for a particular program that have language associated with it that prohibit the use of those funds for stipends. So that's something that we would have to work through, and in fact, a citywide stipend fund may have the opportunity to assist in providing stipends to areas that may not otherwise be able to afford that. We're in the process through the Office of Equity and Community Life, Office of Community and Civic Life of trying to gather more information about advisory bodies and some of the characteristics around the stipends currently being offered. So there should be more information forthcoming that can help formulate some of the thinking around this overall what the stipend framework looks like. Moving on to components of a stipend budget. There's essentially two main components which we've talked about. Each of the members of this work has talked to. One is the actual stipend fund. And what's important to note, and we're certainly not necessarily advocating this, but just so you know for context, if we have $500 maximum stipend to the citywide advisory members, the total cost of that would be $2 million per year. And that's just the total universe of the advisory board members. And certainly it's at council's discretion to set that at some point below that, as well as look at other ways of targeting those areas with higher need in terms of providing some of the goals we're looking for through a stipend program. What's also important to note is that a portion of the city's total stipend costs are related to non-general fund bureaus. Although we don't have the exact breakdown, and we're in the process of gathering more information around that, right now, 49% of regular city employees are currently working for general fund bureaus. So that gives you some estimate of what the cost would be in relation to the general fund. Resources, the second component of the of a stipend budget is resources for operational support. Ashley had talked a little bit about monitoring and tracking, and basically what we would be looking for is dedicated staff to administer a program, to some resources to engage in stakeholder feedback through focus group facilitated groups, time and materials for initial and ongoing training of city staff as well as the volunteers, software to manage a stipend program, and just related office equipment costs and other overhead related to administering the program.
Commissioner Hardesty.
I'm sorry, I had a question, but I'll wait. I'm sorry. The mayor did ask us to wait, so please.
That is really the prepared remarks that I have for these two slides.
Okay.
And then finally.
Last slide,
Just
we
last
promise.
slide. Finally, the questions we have for council are on this last slide around stipends. Should we stipend limit priorities and the citywide fund? And I wanted to mention where we are in the process. Today, we're asking for any and all your considerations for us to review further and to add or eliminate options that we need to bring back to you. We're proposing to do that in May, after then taking this framework and the same set of questions to bureaus, advisory committees, and communities. We have not had, in the 6 months that the budget note was delivered to us, have not had the opportunity to do that, and we feel that's critical. And so today, we're not asking you for decision. We're asking you for your priorities, considerations, et cetera. They will need to be further reviewed legally, and the financial considerations are all weighing on us, and so we are not actually making a budget request for you today.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for the presentation. So my first thought is whether or not the 100-plus advisory committees are effective, if we're getting the outcomes that we want from them, and if we're not, why would we fund committees that aren't actually giving us the outcome that we want? I can think of committees that on paper, they still exist, but they've been around for 10 and 15 years and nothing happens, right? So those kind of oversight boards, I would have no interest in funding in action, right? And so I think the question becomes, how do we as the electeds figure out how we get value for the investment that we're making? And I'm concerned that if most municipalities have 20-some and we have 100, do we have too many advisory boards that really are just advisory boards in name and really aren't adding value to the city's operation? That was not your task. That was not what the budget note said. But I can't help but ask that question when I realize the magnitude of folks who, at least on paper, are providing input to the city. So I guess my question would be, before I could decide, even actually start thinking about what does this look like, I'd want to know that we are actually investing in committees that are really giving the city information that we need. And I would like to disband the ones that have been around forever and no longer serve a purpose.
Commissioner Fritz has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
First of all, thank you very much to Commissioner Udaly and Director Ree and Ashley Jaden for all your work on this. It's an important discussion. And thanks especially to Tony Garcia, Lynn Vu, and Laurie Kraut in the City Attorney's Office. It's definitely something that we want to be very careful about continuing to protect our volunteers from lawsuits. I am very concerned. We don't have $1 million spare we don't have much money spare at all in the next budget. So I'm very concerned that we may be setting up an expectation of being able to move forward with this, where when we all know we have a very constrained budget? Second of all, our boards and commissions don't routinely provide even basic support like transportation assistance, childcare, etc. And I think we should have a discussion about, is that more important, or is that equally as important for providing opportunities for people, as well as a stipend which is going to have to be fairly nominal by law. I was concerned about the statement that 49% of the employees work for general fund, implying that perhaps 49% of the volunteers are in general fund. I think it's much higher than that. We don't have many boards and commissions in the utilities or in the Office of Management and Finance, the Auditor's Office, the ones that are overhead funded or have other sources of funding. So I think the bottom line is I appreciate all the work that's been done, and I'm wondering, is it wise to continue moving forward on this before we have the budget discussion?
I don't know if that's a question you want directly asked, but actually this is incredibly valuable feedback because we do not have that inventory. We have an approximate inventory of even the existence of advisory bodies, and that's been a challenge because we cannot compel. It's a voluntary reporting at this time, so we do not have that information. I have a little bit of deja vu from yesterday's 311 session, is that we actually don't have the data that we need, and we don't have that culture throughout the city of accountability, reporting, and tracking, and that also applies here. And that said, that work that Commissioner Fritz has asked for, can we actually attempt to do an inventory of the attendance supports and the existing investments we're already making, and whether that's a citywide practice? I think that is good work that can come next, and I have noted that. And also, Commissioner Hardesty, when you said, is effectiveness a way to set priorities? And then that's another body of work until we can define and make judgments around effectiveness, but that also is a priority-setting exercise that we could actually undertake in the next phase.
And I want to be clear, I mean, what I mean is the committee fulfilling its charge, right? We have some committees that I know that have been on the books for 10 or 15 years, and they aren't doing anything, right? It would be really helpful for us to have some kind of, I don't know, is there a place to go and look at where all our boards and commissions are? Is there a one-stop place
Yes.
to do that? Where is that?
Yes, on the Boards and Committee website, we can send a link to it. There's a list of boards that we know about. And as far as whether they're fulfilling their charge, my program was established in 2017 to start asking boards to state what their charge is and
Right.
what their scope is. And one question that we have remaining is whether there's mutuality in us wanting to continue to receive that advice and feedback.
Right.
For many of the staff who are working with these boards and commissions, the answer is yes, we want to continue receiving that feedback. The question we would have for council is, who's the ultimate authority to decide whether this is useful feedback and we're getting what we need?
I just want to say, I want to be clear, I absolutely support removing barriers for folks to be able to fully participate in our boards and commissions. And what we know is that if we don't provide food and childcare and transportation assistance, that we cannot get low-income people to come and fully participate. If you're worried about what's happening with your child, if you're worried about where you're going to get dinner, you cannot fully participate in a meeting, right? And so I have been a strong champion forever that we have to find some way to help people when we keep asking them over and over and over again to provide assistance, right? So I wish I had a great answer for you right now to say, if you do this, this, and this, we'll figure it out. I think we have to keep talking about what the values are that are leading this conversation, right? What the limits are based on what our resources are and the processes that we have in place. And then 3, how do we start off prioritizing those who are in the most need, right? For me, those are like the three top ones. But I'm absolutely committed. I think this is the right thing to do, especially because we go out over and over and over again trying to recruit the same people. So I'm on board. I just have to figure out how we do this in a way that doesn't break the bank and actually help people be able to fully participate.
Mayor,
Commissioner Daly.
thank you.
And I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Excellent work. Really appreciate the detailed work. Commissioner Udell.
So Commissioner Hardesty brings up a good point. We do need to determine the universe of these boards and commissions and whether or not their work is still vital. Those are two separate processes. For the sake of this conversation, I think we have to assume the answer is yes, but we don't have to finalize this decision and begin a program until we have completed that other process of determining what bodies we want to preserve. So for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to assume that everyone's contribution is important and wanted, and that we want to honor the time and effort people put into volunteering for the city. I think number one question for me is I would need a accounting of the existing budgets in these individual bureaus for this kind of support, because we don't have to assume we have to find brand new additional money. There's already resources being allocated to this. Where is it? How much is it? Two, I think there's some really obvious criteria for dramatically reducing who would qualify for a stipend. Number one, that would obviously be anyone who's being paid to serve on a committee. We have many professionals who serve on committees. It's part of their job. They don't need a stipend. We have committees that are made up of highly paid professionals. They don't need stipends. Stipends are about reducing barriers to individuals who represent underserved communities, whether
Minimum wage.
Please do not shout,
that's
not interrupt.
Black, Indigenous, or other people of color.
Excuse me, please do not interrupt. You heard the rules, you know the rules. Please do not interrupt.
Violation of state and federal law.
Sorry, Commissioner, go ahead.
Ridiculous. You don't even keep records. Unbelievable. Where's that money been going? Who's it been going to? Why don't you pay a minimum
You know,
wage?
everybody listens to you when you
Wait.
testify. You could at least extend the same courtesy to others. Sorry, Commissioner Daly,
I'm
go
just going
ahead.
to wait for the disruption to subside.
Done.
I think it has. And then I think there's some other obvious criteria that we could just ask people to attest to. I don't want these supports to be difficult to access. I don't want people to be made to feel uncomfortable or guilty for needing them. But I think there's some obvious criteria. Are you housing cost burdened? Do you live in regulated affordable housing? Do you qualify for food stamps? Are you homeless? Are just a few off the top of my head that I think would be very reasonable criteria for receiving stipends. And then now I've lost track of those 5 questions that you wanted us, okay.
4 questions.
So you wanted feedback from council. Yes, I think that we should offer a nominal stipend with constraints following this process we're talking about to determine what boards, commissions, and committees we want to preserve. Yes, I think that we should limit the stipend to $500 a year because it becomes incredibly complicated and puts volunteers at risk if we go above that. We should have eligibility framework based on income and need. And the citywide fund question, I think we're probably going to need more time and information. But the first step towards that would be how much are we already allocating to to these funds.
Okay, I have some feedback. First of all, I think conceptually and from a values-based perspective, this is good. The question I think you are trying to answer is how do we get people who have barriers to participation to participate? So we're all in philosophical agreement. Here's where I start to diverge from what I'm hearing today. I don't know yet that offering a stipend is the answer to the problem, and I'm not sure we've asked the question yet. Have we actually gone out into the community and spoken to people who do not participate, but who would like to participate, and ask them, what do they need in order to have the barriers reduced? I'm persuaded by what Commissioner Hardesty said. What I hear from people is, I do it, except I have a small child, you don't provide childcare, I can't afford childcare. If you were in a place where childcare was provided, then I could. And we do that for our budget work, and we do that for some other meetings that we've had where we provide. When we did our public safety meeting the other day, we had a childcare professional there to help take, and so people who had kids could come. For others, they're going to say it's transportation. Related to that, if you hold the meeting at City Hall and I live on 162nd and you want me at City Hall at 5 p.m., I'm out. So maybe it's about where we hold our meetings and how frequently we get out of the building and go to the community where people actually are. I'd also want to interview the people, or at least poll the people who currently serve on our boards and commissions. What do they think? What do they need? What's successful and what isn't successful? When we get to the one-year pilot, the question I have is, how do you define success? What, do we know the answer to that? What's the metric by which we measure success at the end of the pilot?
Depending on some of the feedback we're receiving today, that's how we would then be able to address that. But yes, that is not something we can answer for you
So,
until we have some of these questions
My
resolved.
gut reaction is this: the metric would have to somehow encompass people, the number of people or the percentage of people who are participating who would not have participated but for whatever the solution is we're offering. And to me, the idea of a stipend just feels like a blunt instrument. I disagree that you could means test this. If you're trying to reach people who may, I'll give you just sort of an obvious example. If you are here as a first-generation immigrant, the idea of turning over your income and your home address and other personal information might actually dissuade you from participating in a public process. So I think philosophically we're all on the right track. I'm not persuaded yet that a stipend is the right solution for this. And number two, I agree with Commissioner Hardesty. I'm still not convinced that we have it right when it comes to community engagement. We have a lot of boards and commissions. We hear from some. Many of them are extremely effective, and people dedicate time, talent, energy to those commissions. Other commissions we don't really hear from, and we don't really have clear understanding. And in some cases, they're advising our bureau directors and bureau leadership, and so we're sort of one off from that. But before we jump to the answer of a stipend will fix our problem, I think we need to clearly define the problem. I think we need to talk to the community. I think we need to talk to people on the boards and commissions and come back with a more refined understanding of what the problem is we're trying to solve, and then put some metrics out here that would help us define what success looks like. And I'm not there yet. So what I'd like to encourage, I don't want to stop your work. I think you're on the right path. I would encourage us at a later date to have a work session, take this information that we're all throwing in the middle of the table here, and then go off and come back with a work session with maybe a more refined set of next steps. And then last but not least, I just have to put it on the record, in my notes here, it looks like the cost is somewhere between $1 and $2 million per year. I just want to reiterate what Commissioner Fritz said, which is for the next year's operating budget, we only have $100,000 in additional ongoing funding. So right off the bat, we would be making a promise that we cannot fulfill today. And I don't want to set up that false expectation in the minds of anybody. And so we might have to be smarter about this in
Mayor?
terms of how we go about it. Commissioner Daly.
So what I heard you say is that we should provide on-site childcare for all our boards and committees.
I didn't say that.
We need an east
I
side.
want to be very clear. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we should evaluate the boards. We have over 100 boards and commissions, and some of them maybe we do, some of them maybe we don't.
Sure.
And maybe alternatively, it's just going out into the community and having our meetings closer to where people live. We're trying to paint with a very broad brush, and I'm not convinced the problem is a broad brush problem. Maybe it's
So-
supporting community organizations that work with frontline communities.
Right, and that actually brings me to one of the points I want to make. This is reducing barriers to participation by offering stipends for things like childcare and transportation or providing food are best practices and they're proven methods of reducing barriers and supporting participation. That's not in question. I have done this kind of work for over a decade, and it's really the least that we can do and the most basic thing that we can do, but it's not the only thing that we're doing. Through Civic Life, every day, we work with the communities you're referring to build capacity in the communities for greater participation, engagement, and leadership. Sure, I'd love City Hall to have an East Side satellite office, or hold these meetings on the East Side. That's achievable. When I suggested there be some criteria, I was very clear that I wanted that opting in to be extremely low barrier. No one's going to have to prove their income. We're going to assume the best of everyone who's already volunteering their time, that they're going to be honest. We're not going to put them in any kind of uncomfortable or precarious position having to share personal information. And, my measure of success is that people who are already volunteering and maybe struggling to show up are showing up more often, that our boards and commissions are more diverse than they currently are, and that we are getting more input from the communities that we're trying to reach. And as far as the budget, like I said, there is already money allocated in many bureaus for this kind of work. So the first question to answer is how much is already there? How is it being spent? Can we use it more efficiently? Is there existing additional resources within bureaus? We're not coming and asking for an additional 1 to 2 million of ongoing funds. That's not what's happening.
Thank you. And Commissioner Fritz has a question, then
All right.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Well, I have a comment. I agree with the mayor that we should have a work session on this. I think it's an interesting discussion and a very important one. And there are just, I think it's going to be hard for us to get to be able to give direction to staff in the meeting today. And second of all, I've always taken it as my responsibility as the commissioner in charge of every bureau that I've been in to help make sure that the boards and commissions become more representative of the community, and also to change the ones that are not working as well. And I actually know that there's one in the Water Bureau that hasn't met for years and years, and I will take responsibility for bringing that to council because unfortunately it's mentioned in the code. So we'll have to do a code change in order to get it out of off the books. But I do think that the Civic Life staff are welcome to ask me, and I'm sure my colleagues on the council, about the different boards and commissions within our bureaus, because I certainly know who serves on each of them and have worked to make sure that they are as supported as possible.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Commissioner Fritz and Mayor. I appreciate the comments that folks are making, but I want to be clear. I don't think that there's any confusion that we are overtapping people with limited resources. There's no wondering about whether or not when we ask low-income people to volunteer their time, whether or not it costs them significantly more than it costs professional people. There's no question about that. The question is, how do we do this in a way that is equitable and that prioritizes people who have the biggest need? And we may even add the people that we desperately need to hear from, right? I would love the lawyers to come back and ask me, or one or all three, or to answer the question about whether or not we could set up criteria that prioritize people based on economic status and based on the needs of the work group, right? And so, it's about whether or not, and I don't want, as Commissioner Udaley said, to actually have people have to go through a means test. I mean, people are very straightforward. When you are one-on-one recruiting them, they will tell you what their barriers are. And if we're not ready to respond to them, then we lose them. And so is there any feedback from our legal eagles to tell us whether or not we could legally set up a process whereby we would have criteria, which meant everybody would not be entitled to it, but could we write it narrow enough that the people that we were trying to engage would be the ones who would be the priority?
And I just want to say, before you answer Commissioner Hardesty's very good question, this is obviously a really important and interesting subject, and we could talk about this for another 3 hours. We do not have the time today, so after this, I will ask for, I'm jumping the gun, but I don't think we're going to have any problem with the report being accepted today and moving on to the next steps and continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Lynn Vu. I'm a Deputy City Attorney. I appreciate the question, and it is a question that came up during our task force discussions. What I can say today is that we've discussed it, and I think we need to look at it very, very thoroughly, and we can get back to you with an answer.
Thank you, appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
I move the report.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Hardesty, a second from Commissioner Udaley. Please call the roll.
Fritz?
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting presentation and discussion. And again, thank you to Sukri and Commissioner Udaley, Ashley Jaden in Civic Life for leading this. Thank you, Dr. Markeisha Smith in the Office of Equity and Human Rights, the Legal Counsel, Tony Garcia, Lynn Vu, and Laurie Kraut, as well as Tom Schneider for the budget guidance, and Kathy Bless in the Bureau of Human Resources, who was involved in the process. I think there are many, many questions still to be discussed, and I support the Mayor's recommendation for a work session rather than trying to do that on the fly today. Some of the things to talk about are, should there be a flat rate or one that's adjusted based on the frequency of meeting, the stipend limit, how do we calculate the cost of the value of benefits like transportation and food, etc., and when you've calculated that in, does that make the stipend almost just not worth doing? And do we allow the bureaus to set additional priorities and eligibility? Should there be a citywide fund so that different bureaus are not at different levels of being able to do this? So those are just some of the things that I am concerned about, and I look forward to the work session. Oh, by the way, I am leaving to come downtown, so I am at this point signing off, and I will be back. I will be in council chambers in half an hour or so.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Hardesty?
I think this is great work. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I have a value of making sure we support our volunteers, and I look forward to the work session and what comes next. I vote aye.
Udaley?
Thank you for the report. I'm also very supportive of the idea of a work session. I think some important questions have been raised today. I do want to assert that I think that our current approach, which is very piecemeal, inconsistent across bureaus, and dependent on the leadership and commissioners in charge, is not adequate. And so whatever we do, I hope moving forward, we at least have a system that is consistent and equitable. I vote aye.
Wheeler?
This was a fantastic conversation today, and I actually am really looking forward to continuing it. And I agree with something Commissioner Daly just said that's really important, which is we really don't have a standardized platform for community engagement. And I think that's where some of the messiness is coming through. So I appreciate your efforts, Commissioner Daly, to try and rationalize and standardize this approach. I appreciate the work that our legal team is doing. Director Ree, thank you for your continued efforts on this. Dr. Smith, as always, thank you for your fantastic leadership and contributions to this effort. I think I put all my questions on the table. I look forward to having those questions and concerns answered. I look forward to continuing this conversation. It's a good one, and it's an important one. I vote aye. Report's accepted. Next item is number 123. Oh, this one looks good. Look at this. All right.
Recognize the 2019 Fire Prevention Poster Contest winners.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. The goal of Portland Fire and Rescue's Prevention Division, I think there's some disagreement in the audience, but we'll see.
One sec. Could you hang that up? There we go. Thanks. Sorry, Commissioner.
No worry. Good morning, colleagues. The goal of Portland Fire and Rescue's Prevention Division is to save lives, property, and the environment by preventing fires before they start. What a cutie, huh? The Prevention Division works to reduce the frequency and severity of fires and other life-saving incidents through a multidisciplinary approach that includes education, engineering, and enforcement. The Prevention Public Education Team offers targeted community outreach programs that are developed and implemented through our local schools, community organizations, and events, and in fire stations. To share some information about this year's fire prevention poster contest is Chief Sarah Boone. Welcome, and your team. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler.
Good morning.
Commissioner Daly, Commissioner Hardesty. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Sarah Boone, Chief Boone, Portland Fire and Rescue, and I want to acknowledge our Division Chief, Fire Marshal Anjanette Jackson, as well as our Public Education Supervisor and Manager, Kim Kosmas.
Good morning.
And Sparky.
Hey, Sparky, good to see you.
This past October, during Fire Prevention Week, Portland area school children were invited to participate in a fire prevention poster contest. The contest helps spread the word on critical fire safety messages and encourages fire safety in the home, the school, and the community. The top 3 winners from each of the 3 age categories were selected by the Pub Ed team, as well as myself, for their creativity and fire prevention message. Portland Fire and Rescue wishes to recognize and congratulate the 3 grand prize winners. And we'll have each of them come up. The first winner, Nali Ritano. 5 years old.
That's a 5-year-old.
Nali is kindergarten, 5 years old, and from Kairos School. Second is Chloe Shaw, a 3rd grade student from Kairos PDF.
That's fantastic. Excellent. And she's with Kairos PDX?
Yes.
Excellent.
And our third is Braden Williams, 8th grade student at Da Vinci Middle School. Yeah. So I just want to thank the Fire Prevention Public Education team. It's a small group, but it's a mighty group. And they do very important work outreaching to the community, to the schools, to young kids. And when it comes to the fire safety message, a lot of these young kids are able to put it into art. And so this has just been a great experience, so.
We appreciate you being here, Sparky, and the whole team. We'd love to have a picture with the award winners, if that's possible. And the families, yes.
Do you want us some back? Okay.
Nice to meet you. Congratulations. Oh, your hands are full. You want to stay next to Sparky?
We'll stand behind you.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are tall enough. I think they can see you.
You're so short, you can squeeze in.
Oh, just blocking it. Okay, okay.
Right here.
All right.
All right. Give me a big smile. Here we go. Safety.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all. Congratulations. Good job. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Great to see you guys next time. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you, Commissioner.
This is the fun part. Thank you for love this. Great work. That's all it's been. So it's so funny, you know, the guy that always comes here.
We'll take a break anyway, because I need to use the bathroom, to be honest with you. Probably shouldn't have said that like that, but. All right, Carla, next item is item number 124. And if people don't mind, we're going to take like a 3-minute break after 124. And I think Commissioner Fritz is on our way anyway, so we might have to. Item number 124, please.
Appoint Joy Mulumba to be available to serve on the Police Review Board for a term to expire February 10, 2023.
This is an appointment by the auditor, and we have representatives from the auditor's team. Greetings.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Ross Caldwell. I'm the Director of Independent Police Review.
Irene Kona, the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Independent Police Review.
And we are here to forward the auditor's recommendation for a new volunteer to serve on the Police Review Board. As you all know, the PRB serves as an advisory body to the police commissioner and the chief. They hear serious disciplinary cases involving police officers. They also review all officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, and they make policy and training recommendations. The auditor's office serves as the body that does the recruitment and the outreach in order to get these volunteers. We had 29 people. We had a very diverse pool this time, and that's all due to the efforts of Ms. Konev here. And with that would conclude my remarks and forward our recommendation for Mr. Joy Mulumba to join the volunteers of the PRB.
Could you tell us a little bit about the nominee?
Yeah, we've got his bio here, which I think should be in your materials. Let's see.
I've read it, and it's a good appointment. I just want to make sure it's on the record.
Yeah. Let's see, I believe that am I missing it? Oh, okay. Mr. Joy Malumba received his Master's of Arts degree in English from Portland State University. He has worked as a nurse assistant in different departments at OHSU and Providence Hospital for 8 years. He currently serves the African immigrant and refugee families in Portland through a nonprofit and works at the library. When he's not reading, writing, or spending time with family, he can be found on the mats learning the gentle art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His words, not mine.
Commissioner Hardesty.
How many community members, non-sworn members currently serve on this committee?
He will be the 15th PRB volunteer that we have.
And have we done any revisions to the process? My understanding is that the last OIR group report had some very specific recommendations on how to strengthen the Police Review Board. And I haven't seen any of those recommendations come in front of us again. I'm concerned that we're asking people to a board that really needs to be fundamentally changed. And so why would we be adding people before we actually made the systemic changes that have been recommended?
My understanding is that no recommendations from the most recent OIR report last year have been taken into account or have been changed. It's not since the last OIR report, I believe, although I think previous ones have been.
If it has, it's not been presented to the council so that we know that those changes have been made. I'm just always concerned about if we put people into a dysfunctional process, they too become dysfunctional.
Yep.
And so that's my concern.
Thank you.
Nothing against the candidate, but.
Very good. Any further discussion?
Nothing from us.
I'll entertain a motion.
Move the appointment
I'll second the appointment.
report, move the report.
Please call the roll.
Hardesty.
So, I don't know that I have enough information about the current work of the Police Review Board. But Mayor, as a courtesy, I'm going to vote yes for this, but I would be very grateful if we as a council got an update about what changes have been made and whether or not those are changes that are helping civilians have a greater voice in the police review process. My understanding is that the way it has worked up until, I don't know, you said the changes have been made, up until the changes you say have been made, have been that those community voices have been very silenced in that process. And so I need to know that the community's role is actually really robust in this review process. And so I look forward to ongoing conversations about the changes that have been made and how community members are faring in that process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was that an aye?
Oh, aye.
Daly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
I agree with Commissioner Hardesty's comments, and it has been a while since we've had a work session on PRB, IPR, and the overall oversight and accountability mechanisms. And I think with more commissioners coming on board sometime after, I guess it would be August, when we'd have a replacement commissioner, would be a really good time to reset that conversation. So I agree with Commissioner Hardesty's comments, and I think the appointee is an excellent appointee, and I want to thank you for ensuring that there was a large and diverse pool of applicants for this position. I know you had to work at that, and I really respect the work you did to do it. I vote aye. The appointment's approved, the report's accepted. Thank you, and we will take a recess until Commissioner Fritz is able to be here.
you're back in session? All right.
Carla, the next item is item number 125, and this is a continued hearing.
Item 125, appeal of the Portland Japanese Garden against the hearing officer's decision of approval with conditions limiting the garden's office use in the house at 369 Southwest Kingston Avenue to 4 years, LU 19-192268CU.
Colleagues, do any members of the council have any new ex parte contacts or site visits to declare or information gathered outside of this hearing to disclose, presumably since the last time you answered this question?
No.
I guess I need to wait for Commissioner Hardesty, don't I, to answer that question? She'll be here in a second.
I think
You
Mustafa's
could, you
on
could
it.
also move forward, and when she arrives, you could ask her to chime in,
Oh,
but that's,
good-
that's
good
at your
plan.
discretion.
Okay, good, let's go ahead and do that. So no council members thus far have any new ex parte contacts or site visits to declare. Does anyone on the, do any council members have any other matters that need to be discussed before we begin the hearing? Before we begin, I need to announce that though I was not present for the January 30th hearing, I've reviewed the record and I'm prepared to participate in the appeal. At the hearing, the council heard from all interested parties and began their deliberations. Commissioner Fritz made a motion to tentatively uphold the appeal and extend the use for 10 years that was seconded by Commissioner Udaley. The council did not take a vote on the motion. We're now back to continue deliberations and vote on the motion. Before we resume, I want to remind everyone that the record is closed. And before we get to the question of whether there's further discussion about Commissioner Fritz's motion, I will ask Commissioner Hardesty, do you have any new ex parte contacts, site visits, or other issues that you need to declare?
Mayor, thanks for the question. Yes, I was contacted by one of the plaintiff in this case. I did not discuss it, but I did let them know that it was inappropriate for me to dialogue, and I'm not quite sure. But yes, so that was my only communication, no site visit.
Okay, and it's my understanding that was via email and you did not respond.
That is correct. Well, I responded and that I could not actually respond.
Good customer service.
Yes,
It's always
yes, yes.
valued here. Does anyone in the chamber have any questions from Commissioner Hardesty based on what she has just disclosed? Seeing none. So we are back to deliberations. Why don't I jump in since everybody's heard what everybody else thinks, and I have a couple of questions for legal counsel. So I was persuaded by the commentary around the conditions under which the original conditional use permit was extended. And my concern is that if we accept the 10-year extension, what we are de facto saying is we are permanently extending the conditional use permit. That sets a precedent. In this particular case, first of all, I want to just express that I hold the Japanese Garden in the highest of esteem. Their leadership, Steve Bloom, I think, is one of the most effective executive director leaders in the city of Portland, and he has justifiably been in that role for some time because of his effectiveness and success. And I want to thank all the people who volunteer on the Japanese Garden. It's always my go-to place when I have people visiting from out of town. But this is very narrowly not a discussion about whether we like the Japanese Garden or don't. This is about a land use case. It's about the facts that are on the record, and it's about the extension of a conditional use permit. And my concern is that by extending the conditional use permit for another 10 years, and ignoring the rest of the conversation that took place previously around promises that were made or not made, the concern I have is this now sets a precedent for residential areas throughout the city and commercial uses in said residential areas. I was pleased to hear on the record, and I believe it was Steve Janik representing the neighborhood, I could be mistaken, but I think it was Steve, who said that they did not want any extension of the conditional use permit, but they could live with the 4 years that was recommended by the hearings officer. And I saw that as a compromise position that would be useful. And therefore, my inclination would be, and by the way, Mr. Janik also indicated that if 4 years goes by and the Japanese garden has not been able to resolve this issue, they would be willing to take up the question again in 4 years. So that struck me as a reasonable compromise position, and it comported with our city staffers' recommendation to City Council. There's a problem with this, and this is now where I'm turning to legal counsel. Ordinarily, we would have this discussion, we'd have the conversation, we'd cast our vote, and that would be that. My understanding is the charter does not actually account for the possibility of a tie vote. Is that correct?
It's City Code Section
It's code, sorry.
3.02040 I4, which requires that either to approve an appeal, uphold an appeal, or deny an appeal, it requires 3 affirmative votes of council.
Okay, so
So,
you
either
see
way.
Maggie with her hat on back there? That's how I feel right now. So,
Looks like Commissioner Fritz is trying to get your.
Commissioner Fritz,
I have a question.
please.
Which approval criterion allows us to put a condition of approval for either 4 or 10 years?
Could I have staff come back up, please? This was your recommendation to council, the 4 years. Could you please do your level best to address the commissioner's question?
Sure. It was actually the hearings officer's decision to limit it to 4 years. It wasn't actually the staff recommendation. But what he based that on was criterion C for livability, and basically saying that office use is fundamentally different from residential use, and that regardless of how many conditions of approval could be placed on it to limit the impacts were going to be different. The neighborhood was unique because it was next to the Japanese garden and the Rose Garden and Washington Park, and that's, you'll find those findings in the findings for criterion C, livability.
Okay, and goal 10, could you, because there was some discussion amongst council members about goal 10, and the question I had, is goal 10 speaking holistically about the city overall, or is it speaking about individual land use decisions?
I believe it speaks holistically about the city overall. It's a requirement on cities to provide for and plan for housing.
Okay, thank you.
And what was the staff recommendation?
The staff recommendation to the hearings officer was to approve the conditional use review with conditions of approval, including a 10-year time limit. The hearings officer adopted the conditions of approval recommended by staff, but changed the condition of approval from 10 years to 4 years because he found the livability criterion, criterion C, would not be met for 10 years.
I have a question about that, and then I'll get to Commissioner Fritz. I apologize. I'm just sort of on this train of thought, and it's interesting to me. So goal 10 does figure into our findings and the criteria that we use for these land use hearings. I could actually make the case that any individual action does not necessarily have a material impact on the overall city's goals around providing housing stock, couldn't I?
I think you could.
So why is it in the code?
It's actually not in the code.
Where is it?
It is because the city's comprehensive plan was appealed, and while that appeal has been pending, certain land use applications where the criteria were affected by the 2035 comprehensive plan that's been under appeal also must demonstrate compliance with the statewide planning goals until that comprehensive plan is acknowledged by the state.
So couldn't I say then in any one of those 2035 issues, if it's not demonstrated that a particular designation has a material impact on the city's overall housing goals, that it is in fact not something we need to concern ourselves with?
I suppose you could. It's not something we have a lot of experience with implementing.
It strikes me as a little bit counter to the common sense objectives. I mean, maybe it adheres to the letter, but I don't think necessarily the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. But that's sort of an aside. Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you. The hearings officer found on page 29, the use of the Kingston House as office space will have or likely have influence or effect on the residential area, and that the applicant's requested 10-year extension will result in significant adverse impacts. And but in the conclusion, it said that there should be, above that, it says, the hearings officer finds that this residential area in this case is unique and that any additional or different noise, glare from lights, late night operations, odors, litter, and privacy do adversely impact the livability of the residential area. The testimony of the nearest neighbor was in support of the application for 10 years. And the record also shows on page 33 that the volume of traffic going past this residence is 2,563 on the highest day. So this is, I just find it incredulous to think that having 12 employees who don't park on the street are adding significantly to 2,500 vehicles on this street.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. For me, the decision, as with you, has nothing to do with my love for the Japanese garden. There was a 10-year period of time where the Japanese garden had the opportunity to build office space. That was the agreement that they made. When I talked to the director of the Japanese garden, and he said, yes, we did our construction, but we didn't construct large enough for all our staff. To me, that is not a compelling reason for us to give them 10 more years to do the same thing. I thought the hearings officer was brilliant by saying, okay, we will give you a little more time for you to address the core issue, which is your new space does not hold all of your employees. The reason why we put conditional use on some land use decisions is because we do not want to set a precedent that it just becomes the norm. It is not acceptable to me that this council would then say, yeah, but we like you, so let's just extend it for 10 more years. It is clear to me that they could have, if they had chose to, the Japanese garden, built enough space to accommodate their office needs. The fact that they chose not to, and then expect that we would just say, okay, we'll wait another 10 years, is to me not acceptable. I can love the Japanese garden and be absolutely opposed to them having 10 more years to actually do what they should have done within the first 10 years of this process. And so that's where I stand. My position has not moved, and that's where I am.
Thank you. Can I ask Commissioner Daly?
First of all, Commissioner Fritz, I still support your motion, but I don't recall supportive testimony from any neighbors.
It's in the record.
It's in the record. Oh, so we didn't hear it in the last,
correct.
yes, okay, thank you.
Could I, sorry, Commissioner, go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
as far as the Japanese garden's opportunity to construct on-site, like any other development, they were constrained with how much they could build on that site. And they chose to dedicate that limited space they had to space that the public can enjoy and space that generates revenue, such as the gift shop and the cafe. So I'm not going to chide the Japanese garden for not giving up those vital opportunities to build office space when they have a building adjacent to them that they're using. I heard no compelling evidence from the opponents that use of that home as an office has any real impact on livability in the neighborhood. I just reject that. And I also reject the notion that we're setting a dangerous precedent by allowing conditional use on one single-family home in very unique circumstances. This has nothing to do with my personal feelings about the Japanese garden. I feel that the arguments around livability and Title X are really grasping at straws. They're not meaningful to me whatsoever. We have an affordable housing crisis. We don't have a lack of housing units. We have thousands of vacant units. So to argue that we can't take one house and let it be used for a non-residential purpose, one house that, I don't know, probably is worth $800,000 to $1 million, which is not going to provide anyone affordable housing, is just not compelling to me. So I continue to support Commissioner Fritz's motion.
Very good. Could I just ask a couple of more questions here, and you may or may not have this information. I believe I heard on the record, and I may have misunderstood this, I believe what I heard was the original conditional use that was extended, that either the hearings office or city staff at that time, and I'm not clear which, indicated that the conditional use criteria would not be met but for the fact that there was an agreed upon time limitation. Do you recall that discussion? And if so, can you elaborate on that?
It was the hearings officer that made that comment in his decision from 2009, that, and I think what he said was that it may not be met or was not necessarily met if not for the 10-year time limit, which was proposed by the applicant at the time. So he wasn't asked to consider anything more than 10 years in that 2009 decision. But I do recall in his findings, he said that, I think in the findings for Criterion A from 2009 decision, that the hearing, or that the conditions of approval limiting the use to 10 years made it so he didn't have to address whether a permanent conditional use would meet the criteria, and a permanent conditional use he found would not necessarily meet them.
Okay, so it wasn't as hard a line as it would not have met the conditional use criteria but for the 10-year cutoff.
I mean, if you'd like, I can pull it out and read it to you, because I don't want to mischaracterize it.
Well, wasn't it because the neighborhood was threatening to appeal, and by having the 10 years, they agreed to it?
I don't know what happened before they got to that point in 2009, but in the 2009 hearing, the Neighborhood Association actually supported the Japanese Gardens application. They had a separate agreement that they had entered into. Then part of that was that the use would be limited to 10 years.
I have a legal question. I hate to ask legal questions, but this is all legal. So I have raised the concern about precedent. Commissioner Udaley indicates that she does not see this as precedent because it's very narrowly focused on a particular land use decision. Could you give us some clarity on that? Can you put my mind at ease that this does not set precedent?
I'm not sure if you're asking globally about conditional uses. I mean, we have
Yes, I
many
mean,
types of.
my
Our
concern.
code provides for many types of conditional uses in many different zones. Most conditional uses are very fact-specific, and the purpose of a conditional use is that you will allow something that would not be allowed outright, but what you're trying to do is address any of the impacts that that use would have on allowed uses in the neighborhood. So
Okay, so this is helpful. So is there some way to clearly state for the specifics of this findings, this set of findings, that this is a unique one-off circumstance and it is the council's stated intent that it not set a precedent in other areas of the city? Do you see what I'm getting at? I may not be clear.
I mean, typically, the findings are addressing particular criteria. And so the question would be, is there an interpretation that council is making of the criteria that, you'd be concerned that that might apply in other circumstances. And yes, I will say that we do that regularly in your decisions when there are really fact-specific circumstances that lead you to interpret the code language in a particular way. And we can certainly circumscribe it.
Right, because Commissioner Udaley also made a good point, which is, look, this is right next to one of the largest tourism destinations in our city, and in fact, the entire state, and therefore there is already a significant amount of street-based activity and the like. I do not necessarily want to open this precedent in other parts of the city. So it sounds like what you were telling me is we are protected from that. Is that correct or no?
I think that the decision can be written in such a way that, and if you're talking about temporal limitations, I mean, conditional uses don't, the criteria don't specifically speak to temporal limitations.
What do you
And the
mean?
reason you would do that is because you think of there are particular impacts. And so you absolutely can write the findings in such a way that it is specific to a particular application.
Right, well, and
That's what you're asking.
how would you do that? Because what I don't want to do is have someone in Lentz sue me or the city council saying, wow, you know, you set a precedent over here in, you know, up by the park and the Japanese garden, and now we're going to use the precedent that you already used there to put commercial uses in residential areas in Lentz. I want to protect us from that, and I want to be unequivocal in that. And so the question is, how do we write this in a way that would not be precedent setting? Because we could be sued, right, based on precedent.
We could just be sued because people sue us, right?
Well, no, I don't,
Right?
I mean successfully sue. I get sued 5 times a day. I just mean successfully.
Isn't the the nature of conditional use is very specific to each individual site. So this idea of precedent, I think, is unnecessarily confusing the matter, because there is a set of criteria that has to be met in order for the conditional use to be allowed. And those criteria and whether or not they're met are going to vary from site to site. And it's not like we don't ever want to allow another conditional use again. I mean, we get to weigh each one.
Did you have something to?
So I guess I'm
Commissioner.
sorry. So I guess I'm just concerned that the reason that we do a conditional use is because of a condition that exists. If the plaintiffs actually developed a good neighbor agreement, if the plaintiff said this, in this period of time, we would have resolved the issue that requires this conditional use permit, why would we then say, well, just because this is such a nice place to go to, that we're going to let them do this indefinitely, right? If we want people to respect the rules that the city puts down and says, this is the process, this is how you do it, it is inconceivable to me that we will continue to make exceptions for things that we like versus things that we don't like. So to me, I'm really trying to understand why extending this for, what will change in 10 years? Will they have built the office space? Will they no longer need the house? What do we think will be different in 10 years if you approve this?
Commissioner Fritz had a question.
Well, I just have a comment. Could I just remind the council that the council approved a conditional use for the spa in Northeast in a residential zone to allow a commercial use in the residential zone? So that's clear evidence that we do, these are one-offs based on, does it address the approval criteria? And Commissioner Daly and I are not talking about, we like the Japanese garden, we're talking about what do the approval criteria say?
And what are the impacts? And the impacts are minimal. And that is the essential criteria, in my understanding, of a conditional use.
Hi, Douglas Hardy with Bureau of Development Services. So I think the last set of comments address in part what I was intending to indicate, but typically for conditional uses, there aren't time limits placed on them.
Yeah.
So for example, most every school in the city is a conditional use. They've been conditional uses for 80 years. hospitals, universities, all of those are conditional use entities that don't have time limits on them. So I think if you want to put a time limit on, for this particular circumstance, again, it has to be related to the approval criteria. So there has to be something related to one of the approval criteria, that there's some negative impact that effectively demands that we put a limit on the time. I think to your specific question, Mayor, about precedent setting, and to reiterate to some degree what the city attorney had indicated, is conditional uses, I think, as you indicated, are very site-specific. Just because we approve one in this neighborhood doesn't mean the exact same facility is going to be approved in another neighborhood. Because as we do the evaluation, we, the city, or the BDS does the evaluation, we're looking at the very site-specific impacts. What are the impacts on traffic? What are the impacts on parking, noise, odor, et cetera?
Okay.
So it could be very different in a different circumstance.
And let me ask you a question. Maybe you know this and maybe you don't, because we're dealing with a little bit of history here as well, aren't we? So the original conditional use permit did have a timeline on it, which you're saying is an exception to the broader rule.
It's unique.
Why was it put on?
I'm sorry.
Why was there a time limit put on it?
That's a good question. As Andy indicated, there was an agreement between the garden and the neighborhood as to the limit, the extent of that office use. I won't say, well, I guess I will say in the hearings officer's original approval in 2009, was it? I think similar to the current hearings officer's decision, and in fact, it was the same hearings officer. It wasn't necessarily clear in the findings why there was the 10-year. And in fact, as you indicated, there was reference in the hearings officer's report that potentially if there wasn't this a 10-year time limit, it may not have been approvable, but there was really nothing in those findings that sort of said why, what is the importance of that.
That's helpful to me. And one more question of legal counsel, and I'm sorry, I'm really working you overtime today. What would be the consequence of us not reaching a consensus opinion?
So
In other words, a 3-1 vote or a 4-0?
there's no consequence to a 3-1 vote, as long as you have 3 votes.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. If we're tied, sorry.
If you are tied,
Yeah.
it means we get to keep deliberating until we reach a decision. We are obligated, when there's an application submitted, we're obligated to reach a decision.
Okay, so I'll just put a marker out, pop up, not necessarily related. I think we need to revisit the way the code is written, the way it's drafted, and maybe something like if there are only 4 commissioners, majority wins, because I honestly, I think it's.
Well, the majority will win.
now.
It's the tie.
Well,
I don't think there's anything to do.
It doesn't anticipate a tie.
Could we get the auditor down here to place a vote? I'm just kidding, just
Well,
kidding.
the difference is this would have been wrapped up
Yeah.
previously, and so I feel like my presence actually is not helpful. My presence at this point creates a tie, and we need to figure out how to move on from a tie situation. Yes?
I have the hearings officer's findings from 2009, where he addresses your question. Would you like me to read those to
I
you?
would.
Yes.
So that was the applicant's proposal at that time, based on an agreement they had with the neighborhood association, I believe, to only propose 10 years. So it wasn't something imposed out of nothing from the hearings officer at the time. But what he said was, and this is in the findings for approval criterion A in 2009, the hearings officer, throughout this decision, considered the use of the house as administrative offices to be for a limited term. Under this approval criteria, the hearings officer measured the intensity and scale of the proposed use as those flowing from only a 10-year term. The hearings officer notes that had this proposal not included a 10-year term, the hearings officer may have arrived at a conclusion that the overall residential appearance and function of the residential area would have been significantly lessened, and therefore, this approval criteria would not have been met. As such, with the representation by the applicant that the house and subject site would be used for administrative purposes for a period of 10 years, the hearings officer finds that the overall residential appearance and function of the residential area will not be significantly lessened. The hearings officer finds with the 10-year term, this approval criterion is met.
I have a couple comments.
Commissioner Daly.
I would support getting rid of the time limit altogether. I appreciate you sharing that with us, but as I said earlier, I heard no evidence that there was a truly negative impact to the livability of the neighborhood by the use of this residence for offices. And the reason that I am ardently pursuing a 10-year extension is, there are two. One is that this is an expensive and time-consuming process for the garden to go through. And two, it's a time-consuming process for council. So I would just like everyone to consider that. We may have this come back 4 years from now and have yet another hearing on it.
Commissioner Hursti.
Thank you. Well, my expectation would be in 4 years, they would have had office space, that there would be no need to come back in 4 years because they would have actually identified or built office space that they would then move their staff into. I don't know why it would come back in 4 years. And again, I go back to what was the agreement made, and I really appreciate you putting that on the record because I do remember reading through and realizing that there was a good neighbor agreement. You meet with your neighborhood association, you come to agreement, then you go to a hearings officer, and they say, okay, yes, you can do this under these stipulations. I mean, I expect people to actually follow the rules that they agree to, unless there's a compelling reason not to. And then when you tell me, when I ask you directly, the reason you didn't is because you just didn't build enough office space, I'm sorry, that does not pass the smell test for me. I think if you knew you had a 10-year time limit, then you plan accordingly. I mean, it's not like we said you got to figure it out in a year. So I don't want to be a part of actually just supporting stuff that actually is not what we agreed to. If you agreed to this, now, if there had been some financial reason, there had been some major disaster, and there was a reason why we could not perform as we said we would, then I would have been very happy to reconsider it. But that's not what the plaintiffs presented to us, and so that's where I am. Thank you.
So without significant impacts on livability in the neighborhood, we're going to allow a small group of neighbors to adversely impact the garden and potentially everyone who enjoys and benefits from the garden. Without meaningful impacts to the neighborhood, it's still unclear why the hearings officer, or what condition he was attaching that opinion to. And it sounds like they came to an agreement with the neighbors on the 10 years to appease the neighbors, but there is no, the garden made it clear that they don't have the resources to build offices in 4 years, so that's.
Could I get a clarification? And I know this was raised during the hearing, so I know it's material to this conversation. The executive director was giving his testimony, and he was just about to answer the question I wanted to hear answered, and then I think his time ran out. And the question that I wanted answered was, of the individuals who are in the office immediately adjacent to the garden, how many of them, as either a condition of their employment or as a requirement of the work they do, need to be in immediate proximity to the park?
Well, I think that was in the record that the applicant had stated that all the people that work in the house go to the garden on a daily basis or on a frequent basis.
As part of their employment?
Right.
What do they do?
I don't know. I don't really know what they do, and I don't believe that was ever stated, and now the record is closed.
Okay, all
But I understand that but they did say, and that wasn't definitely in the record, that the people that work in the house are people that they feel need to be close to the garden because they go there on a regular basis.
Yeah, and in all fairness to them, it seemed like they agreed to a whole host of stipulations in terms of how many people could be in the house, where they would park, issues around lighting, noise, after-hours operations, and I was very pleased to hear that. Commissioner Fritz.
Whether or not the Japanese garden could put staff somewhere else is not part of the approval criteria.
Yeah.
So if a land use application meets the approval criteria, it must be approved. And there isn't evidence in the record as to why the livability criterion is not met. So the issues of was there a deal, have they met with the deal, that's not part of the approval criteria. Although there may have, this is what in the appeal, although there may have been some question in 2009 about how the office use might integrate with the neighborhood, there should be no question now. The garden has demonstrated through this application that over the past 10 years, the office use has not only caused none of the approval criteria and enumerated significant adverse impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, the use has had no significant adverse impacts of any kind.
All right, very good. So sometimes being mayor means you just have to suck it up, and this is going to be one of those circumstances. We're obviously at a stalemate. Code requires us to have a majority. I think my colleagues have made some very good points. I think all of us agree we love the Japanese garden. I actually have concerns about this, but in order for us not to have a democratic crisis here under the current requirements of our ordinance, I will vote with my colleagues over here so that we can move on. But I'm also going to say something for the record. Number one, we need to revisit the code so that this never happens again. The code assumes immortality, and it assumes we will not, therefore, have a tie. And unfortunately, sadly, we know that not to be true. So I would like that code revisited. Number two, I have an expectation of the Japanese garden because I hold them in such high esteem and because I know their leadership is extraordinary and I know their allies are very smart, savvy, influential, and concerned members of this community, that they will work with the Parks Bureau. And I did hear some concerns about their relationship with the Parks Bureau going way, way, way back. Let's see if we can find a better solution in the coming years that work for everybody. And it may be that at the end of the day, we can't get there, but I would at least like this not to be an excuse to do nothing. I think we should continue the conversation. I'm currently the Parks Commissioner, and I will commit to beginning that process and that conversation, and let's see what we can do together. So with that, if there's no further discussion, I'll entertain, we already have the motion on the table. At this point, I'll just call for the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioner Daly. Your points were all really well made, and I support them. Thank you to staff, thank you to the neighborhood folks and the Japanese garden. We have to make decisions based on the approval criteria, and like Commissioner Daly, I don't see anything in the approval criteria that actually allows for a 10-year time limit. And so that in itself, I think, is a compromise, and I appreciate the Mayor for breaking the tie. Aye.
Hardesty?
I appreciate my colleagues. I guess I'm thrilled that we don't always think all the same and we don't all have the same, come at these issues from the same direction. For me, this was a very easy vote, and the vote was simply, you make an agreement, you get a conditional use, you either keep the agreement or you don't. And so to me, it's really cut and dry, especially when I talk to the director and find out that in 10 years, there was no movement to actually make the change that they'd agreed to. It is very unfortunate that that we're going to once again kind of cave for an issue that I think leadership is required, and leadership means that you hold people to their word. So I vote no.
You Daly.
Well, it sounds to me like the original 10-year limitation was a concession to the neighborhood, not based on actual criteria. And that is why I am very comfortable and very supportive of Commissioner Fritz's motion. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
As I think has been made crystal clear, I actually support the recommendation of the hearing officer. However, we have an issue with the ordinance that requires us to be able to move on with only a majority vote. I'm persuaded by many of the arguments Commissioners Fritz and Udaley have made, but I am not persuaded by all of them. I do expect the Japanese Garden to work with me as the new, or at least temporary Parks Commissioner to resolve this issue. Frankly, I believe that whether it is part of the findings or not, the Japanese Garden made a commitment to the community, and they did not live up to that commitment. That is problematic for me. And so I think that that commitment does not dissolve today simply by us taking this vote. And I would hope that they would continue to provide the excellent leadership that they provide and take the initiative in the way they take the initiative so many times in so many other positive ways for our community, and continue to sit at the table and engage with the neighbors. I vote aye. This is a tentative vote in approval of the motion offered by Commissioner Fritz. We will come back for a final vote. The motion today is to tentatively uphold the appeal and extend the use for 10 years. It is passed 3-1. This matter will return to council for the adoption of findings and a final vote on.
The next time we have a full council is March 4th, if that will work for everybody, at 10:15 a.m.
Yes, you do, yeah. Never mind.
Okay, good. Anything else, legal counsel? Did we cover all of our bases there?
So Carla, I just want to confirm, we have the entire council that date?
Correct.
Okay, then we are good.
Good. All right, everybody be there. All right, thank you. That item's tentatively resolved. Next item, to the regular agenda, item number 134.
Authorize a competitive invitation to bid for digester cleaning services to be performed at the Columbia Boulevard wastewater treatment plant.
Colleagues, the city's primary wastewater treatment plant in North Portland is Oregon's largest. It helps protect public health and our environment 24 hours a day, year-round. The digesters are a key part of the process, turning waste into reusable products, methane for renewable energy, and biosolids for soil amendment. To keep the digesters functioning properly, they need to be periodically cleaned. Here today to give a brief presentation on this is Bill Sterling, Treatment Plant Operations Supervisor, and of course, Rob George, Operations Manager, both with the Bureau of Environmental Services. Take it away.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. As you stated, my name is Bill Sterling. I'm an Operations Supervisor at the Bureau of Environmental Services.
It's not on there.
Sorry. My name is Bill Sterling, Operations Supervisor with the Bureau of Environmental Services. With me today is Rob George, Operations Manager, and my boss. So, like I said, we work at the wastewater treatment plant. It's located in North Portland. It's the largest in the state. It's Portland's main wastewater treatment plant. The plant has been providing wastewater treatment for the city of Portland since 1952. We're proud to be there operating and maintaining the facilities for 24 hours a day. It's a year-round operation, and we've been doing it for nearly 7 decades. Today, we are here requesting authorization to use the competitive bid process to obtain the most responsible contractor providing the best price, meeting the specifications for digester cleaning and residuals disposal services. In this aerial view, you could see we have approximately 100 acres in North Portland. And in red, there are 10 circular tanks highlighted that are our solids digesters. These tanks collectively have about 20 million gallons of capacity. Some are bigger and some are smaller, as you might be able to see. As a closer look, explaining what the digesters do in the process, is they are key for the treatment process as they provide for the treatment of the organic solids that come into the plant. They are set up and intended to act like the human stomach by using organic matter as food to create reusable products such as methane and biosolids. The Bureau needs to have each of these 10 digesters cleaned at the plant every 2 years, which equates to about 5 a year. Cleaning is necessary to maximize biosolid storage, sustain performance, and optimize biogas production. This is a picture of a digester that is in need of cleaning. It is full of unusable material.
So to clean it, do you actually have to shovel it out? I mean, how do you do that?
That's what the contractor would do, but they usually insert a pump and pump it to their dewatering equipment and then haul it away to a permitted landfill.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hardesty.
Is there any new technology that actually would be self-cleaning and therefore would not have to take this expense every couple of years of cleaning it out?
If it exists, we are not aware of it.
Then maybe we should build it. Right? Because it just, I don't know, you know, we're moving into this climate future, right? My question is always going to be, is there a green way to do this? Because it doesn't seem like this is good for the environment, pulling this stuff out of the ground and taking it to a dump somewhere, right? It's not actually going to help us meet our climate justice goals if we continue to do that and not looking at what's out there that actually is innovative, is green, that allows us to actually be leaders around how do we continue to do this in a way that makes sense. Just inquiring minds want to know.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next slide. So this is what a clean, inside of the tank, clean digester looks like after all the inorganic material has been removed. The cleaning process removes, like I said, the non-organic material. Over time, these large tanks accumulate inorganic material like the sand, grit, as well as rocks, rags, and plastic material that come off the streets of Portland and other sources. The cleaning process ensures they sustain their capacity and operate properly. Sorry?
Where do we dump that stuff?
Previously, that is what the contractor gets a permit for to take our stuff. We have some experience. The last contract they went out, they took it to Arlington up by Hermiston. So we are here to request you to authorize conducting an invitation to bid for the digester cleaning services to clean the 5 digesters a year. The estimated cleaning cost of the digester is based on the previous contract we had in 2018. And we have moderate to high level of confidence in this estimate. And the funds are available in our sewer system operating fund.
Can I ask a question? This is coming to council because it fits within our contracting criteria, is that right?
My understanding is that we come before you because it's over a certain price.
Yeah, okay, but this is
level.
ongoing standard procedure, is it not? I mean, there's nothing unusual here.
We would like it to be.
It's a maintenance activity.
Yeah, and you do this every so often, I mean, is a requirement of the system, right?
Yes.
Correct.
And is this consistent with what you've been paying in the past?
That's what this is based on, is the results of past cleaning efforts.
Okay, so it could be a little more, it could be a little less.
Right.
Okay, all right.
True, yeah. That's it. Thank you for your time, and we'll
Oh,
entertain
Commissioner
any
Hardesty, I
questions.
think Bill has
Oh,
a
I'm sorry.
question for you.
Thank you. Can you tell me who the contractors are and what their diversity breakdown has been in the past and what you're hoping for with this contract?
So the last contractor that we used had a very diverse labor pool. We will be using our procurement specialists to their fullest capabilities. But I will also add that this is fairly specialized work requiring a lot of safety considerations and specialized tools and equipment to make this happen.
Right, which is why I was asking about the equity goals. If you've achieved those goals in the past, my expectation wouldn't be that you would not be able to achieve it in your new contract. Is that your expectation as well?
That is our expectation, yes.
And did you achieve your goals in the last contract?
I am not sure of that. We could check.
Certainly would appreciate knowing what that breakdown has been in the last contract and what you expect in the new one. Thank
I'd be
you.
happy to provide that.
Yeah, I just want to say, I have found it fascinating learning about this. And at some point, I'd actually like to tour the facility. I'm advised to tour it before the heat of summer. But I really appreciate the work you do out there, and I'd like to see it. I'd like to learn more about it. Commissioner Fritz.
It was one of my more memorable field trips with my kids. I just wanted to say that I'm thinking very fondly of Commissioner Fish and seeing Senna Lawrence working here, who has, the presentations from environmental services have really become very interesting, clear. You have answers to most of our questions, and that's definitely due to his leadership over 5+ years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, appreciate it. Carla, is there any testimony on this item?
And no one signed up.
All right, well, maybe they'll all go on the tour with me, and that'll
We'll welcome the
gin up
opportunity.
some questions.
It was interesting.
It's
I
very
remember it.
interesting, yeah, it's, do people actually have to go into the tank? Like
They do.
And so I
They
assume
do.
they're hazmat, breathing apparatus, all that. So I see what you mean when you say
Right.
specialized and dangerous
Right,
work.
following all the OSHA confined space rules and all the precautions in place
Okay,
when
thank
they
you.
do that.
Yeah, appreciate it. Appreciate the work you all do. It's some of that invisible work that city employees do that they won't notice it when you do it right, but boy, if things go badly, they'll notice it right away.
Right,
So thank you for that. Appreciate
for
it.
the
Thank you,
opportunity.
Asena, as well.
Very much.
Very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Next item is a second reading, 135.
Grant a one-year temporary revocable permit to Celco Partnership doing business as Verizon Wireless for wireless communications services in the city.
Colleagues, we've already heard a presentation and taken public testimony on this item. Is there any further business? Please call the roll.
Fritz?
Well, this is another occasion where having just 4 of us has modified the outcome, and I appreciate the compromise that's been made in order to be able to have 4 of us willing to vote for this. I would have liked to have locked it in for a longer period because I don't trust what the Federal Communications Commission is going to do, regardless of who wins the election in November. Aye.
Hardesty?
No.
Udaly?
Well, this is one of those,
So 5, 4.
No, it doesn't. This is just no, this is legal. You don't make.
It's a non-emergency.
What's the controversy?
The question is whether or not this item 135, needs a 4 vote.
It's a
I'm
permit.
saying it needs just 3, but
I understand just 3.
Okay.
well, it's unfortunate that we're moving forward with a compromise without 4 votes, because like Commissioner Fritz, I would have preferred to lock this in for a longer period. This is one of many circumstances on council where we are offered 2 choices, neither of which is desirable, and we have to go with the one that causes the least harm. Do you want to interject, Commissioner Fritz?
May I ask a question? If, can we change this to have a temporary 5-year permit or a temporary 10-year permit?
Like staff is in the room as well. They're
Oh, we have staff coming up. So what I know is that, across our region, people are shifting from franchise to these contract agreements. And it's better, I think, for the public, but we have the expert.
So you guys are really testing my legal skills today. It's highly unusual for us to offer an amendment halfway through a vote. So I'm going to have to ask legal counsel what the precedent is here.
Well, I'll move to reconsider when it passes then, if that works.
Okay, so understanding that,
Should you finish the vote first?
Yeah.
Yes, you can finish the vote and then.
okay, why don't we, just to be
Go.
safe, why don't
Yes.
we finish the vote and then let's come back for reconsideration?
We were on you, Daly.
So my recollection of this item is that we negotiated the strongest agreement we could with Verizon in anticipation of the FCC forcing something a lot less desirable down our throats. And that is why I support it, and that's why I'm voting aye.
Wheeler.
I vote aye.
I move to reconsider.
Wait, I have to say it passes first, so it passes. Commissioner Fritz?
Move to reconsider.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for reconsideration. Call the roll on the reconsideration.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
No.
You, Daly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. We have a
So
reconsideration
question
on
for
the table.
staff.
If I can rephrase the question, Commissioner Fritz, your question is,
And identify yourself, please.
what's that?
Identify yourself for the
Oh,
record,
I'm sorry,
please.
yes, Jennifer Lee with the Office for Community Technology. Your question is, can we have this as a 5-year temporary permit rather than a 1-year? We can. Typically, what our office has done in the past, although this situation is a little bit unusual, but when we have had a temporary revocable permit, we have had it for a 1-year term because of the length of time it takes for a franchise to go through the public process required by city charter.
But we've already done the franchise process, right?
We have not finished it.
So how long, do you think you can get it done within a year?
Yes.
Okay. In that case, maybe I should withdraw my motion
Okay.
to reconsider. Or-
Second.
Now what do we have to do? Vote on it again?
No, we don't, because no motion's been put on the table.
There's no
so
motion
the-
on the table.
The motion
Okay.
stands as passed.
All right.
Okay, is that good?
Yeah, because we'll obviously have another council member within the year.
Okay, so the motion has passed.
Okay.
The ordinance is adopted. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you.
It's very interesting today. Yes. Next two items, Carla, please, could you read them together, 136 and 137, please?
Yes, 136, authorize North Macadam urban renewal and redevelopment refunding bonds. And 137, authorize Lentz Town Center urban renewal and redevelopment refunding bonds.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Gurok with Debt Management in the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services. The purpose of the ordinances under items 136 and 137 is to authorize the refinancing of existing bonds for interest savings. The bonds eligible for refinancing are the Series 2010 AB Urban Renewal and Redevelopment Bonds for the Lentz Town Center Urban Renewal Area, and the Series 2010 A and B bonds for the North Macadam Urban Renewal Area. The Lentz bonds are currently outstanding in the amount of $25 million. A refinancing of these bonds in today's market conditions is projected to result in approximately $2.8 million in present value savings. The North Macadam bonds are currently outstanding in the amount of $42 million. And the refinancing of these bonds in today's market conditions is projected to result in approximately $5.2 million in present value savings. Savings from both refinancings will be distributed to the underlying taxing districts, including the City of Portland's general fund and other local government units. Under the current plan of finance, we are planning to maintain current payment levels, thereby shortening the life of the bonds by paying additional principal each year. This would ultimately result in tax revenues returning to the general fund more quickly. We'll be working with the finance staff at Prosper Portland over the coming weeks, and it's anticipated that the refinancings will be completed as early as March and April for the Lens bonds and North Macadam bonds, respectively. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay.
So I just have, Commissioner Fritz, I apologize.
I just want to make sure my math is correct. So your brilliant department is saving us $8 million with this refinancing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Like
Well,
I said-
it's all of the taxing districts. So the city's portion of the savings would be a fraction of that based on the proportion of what our tax rate is relative to the consolidated
And
tax rate.
honest as well. But essentially, though, you're saving the taxpayers that amount of money, so thank you.
Very good. Is there any public testimony on either of these items, Carla?
No one signed up on either of these.
All right, very good. On 136, call the roll, please.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Ordinance is adopted. 137, call the roll, please.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Love when we save money on these bonds. Aye.
Udaly.
Well, today's item is a standard bond refund procedure. I want to take a moment to highlight the auditor's report on the Lents urban renewal area that was released this morning. I encourage everyone to take a moment to review it, and in particular wanted to draw attention to the need for better result tracking in our urban renewal areas. In the Lents URA, home ownership for people of color has gone down. The number of people who can afford their rented home has gone down. Gentrification has accelerated in Lents and now affects much of East Portland. Given the troubling history of urban renewal areas, particularly for communities of color, it's unacceptable for us to fail to properly measure success in our URAs. With our current URAs and with any future URAs, I will be looking closely at justification for proposed actions and monitoring how we plan to measurably improve the lives of residents in those areas. With that said, I vote aye.
Wheeler.
Related to the same audit, I would just put 2 points on the table. Number one, absolute progress does not necessarily, or the lack of absolute progress does not necessarily mean the city's resources that have gone into an area have been for naught. In the absence of our efforts around transportation, planning, parks, development, economic development strategies, and other strategies, in the absence of our funding, the situation could be much worse. And I would particularly note that with regard to housing through the Housing Bureau. Secondarily, and I sort of hinted at this earlier in our conversation when I asked, how do we measure success? By what metrics are we defining success? And where I agree with the auditor on this is there has to be clarity up front what success looks like and how we will measure success. And I've noticed a trend in a number of the audits that have come up recently is the auditor has said, you either didn't measure something we thought you should, or you measured the wrong thing. The time to have that conversation isn't 10 years into a project, it's before we get into it. And I feel like you've been very clear about what the metric here is. The metric is to find the lowest interest financing mechanism in order to spread those dollars as far as we possibly can. And you do that on an ongoing basis. You scrub for opportunities around better financing packages, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do, and you're very, very good at it, and I appreciate that. But part of the work I would like this council to do vis-a-vis the independent audit function is somehow engage the auditor earlier in these conversations around what criteria they think should be added to the list of criteria that we're evaluating, so that there isn't just a fundamental difference of agreement, like we had, for example, on the Portland building. We were literally fighting over apples and oranges as to whether, how that project should be evaluated in terms of outcomes. And the only way we can resolve this is by either arguing after the fact, or the better strategy is to have an agreement up front about what the metrics for success are. So I just want to encourage that. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item is 138, also a second reading.
Approve findings to authorize an exemption to the competitive bidding requirements and authorize the use of the alternative contracting method of construction manager, general contractor in connection with the Park Lane Park construction project for an estimated amount of $8,500,000.
Is there any further discussion on this item? Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz?
I am so happy about this. This neighborhood has been waiting for this park to be completed for decades, and I honor Ron and Jen Clemenson and Tom Lewis and a lot of the other Centennial Neighborhood Association folks who have worked on it for a really long time, and the park staff that I know will do a fantastic job with it. Aye.
Hardesty?
I vote aye. I want to make sure, though, that we are looking at how we engage minority and women contractors. I love this idea of the alternative contracting so that we can be intentional about who really benefits from these public dollars. And I look forward to following the process to ensure that we exceed the goals that we set. I vote aye.
Udaly?
Aye.
Wheeler?
I want to thank Commissioner Fritz. This has been your baby for many, many years. And East Portland deserves to have a park like this. This isn't a check-the-box park. It's really going to be an amazing, fabulous, high-value park asset. It would not have happened without your leadership. And I know Commissioner Fish was also very, very supportive of this vision. He and his team continued that enthusiasm. But you know, it does matter who champions these things in order to get it done. And you have been relentless in championing this, and everybody's going to benefit from it. It really is going to be one of those just extraordinary, great places that everybody's going to be happy about. I'm very happy to support this and vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, 139.
Amend ordinance to increase compensation for subrecipient contract with Urban League of Portland in the amount of $107,000 for services in support of coordinated fair housing enforcement.
Very good. We have Kim McCarty here from the Housing Bureau. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Kim McCarty with the Portland Housing Bureau. And I'm here to give you a brief overview about this contract with the Urban League and El Programa. When reporting on the findings of the recent fair housing testing audit, Fair Housing Council of Oregon provided the city with a comprehensive report with recommendations to increase access to legal services, culturally sensitive services, and provide incentives for private attorneys to accept fair housing cases. So in this contract with Urban League, that is what we're doing. And in response, the collaborative has been very successful in reaching communities that historically would have been reluctant to report out of fear of retaliation. And to continue this good work, we're increasing the budget by $107,000, excuse me.
Bargain. Let's take it. It's on the record. Let's take it.
The amount needed to fully fund the program until the end of the fiscal year. We have some rental services office resources that remain unallocated, and we feel they are best spent on this program. So the current goal is to reach 55 currently underserved Black and Hispanic households that have experienced housing discrimination and will receive a suite of services that include fair housing enforcement, education counseling, and rent assistance to ensure their long-term housing stability. And with this funding, the service goals will be increased to 20 households. So thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate it. Could I ask one question?
Yes.
Given the number of households and given the specific budget ask of $107,000, what is actually involved in each of the engagements that's proposed?
Yeah.
Could you walk us through the work the Urban League would actually be doing?
Yeah. First of all, Urban League is in a collaborative with the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, LASSO, and El Programa.
Thank you.
The clients are coming through the current ways that both of those programs, El Programa and Urban League, interact with their clients. So that's rent well classes. They have rent assistance. They have various programs, health programs, employment programs. So however a person is coming to them, they are listening to that client for fair housing considerations, because many of the fair housing issues that people have reported experiencing are very difficult for even the individual to identify that that's what they've experienced. And so Urban League and El Programa have trained their resource specialists to look out for that, to inquire further, and then put those individuals in communication with either Legal Aid Services of Oregon or Fair Housing Council of Oregon, depending on the nature of the issue, if it's a fair housing issue or if it's a landlord-tenant type of issue.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much for your presentation. So I'm kind of curious, as I look at the list, there are issues like home repairs and home retention and financing and stuff that actually doesn't have to do with our people being discriminated against who are attempting to rent housing or purchase homes. And so out of the 4.5 million, I'm kind of confused, if we're talking about fair housing, the fair housing enforcement piece, I'm just kind of confused why there's so many other things that are mixed in it as
I
a
could
package.
explain.
Please.
Okay. What you see in front of you is what we call the master ordinance. So for the Portland Housing Bureau, it's any service contract that we have, if it's homeownership or rental services, that's over $100,000. And because this particular contract was in that mix and the amount was over $100,000, we felt it was best to bring back the original ordinance, the master ordinance, and amend it to indicate this increase for this particular budget. So it's a procedural method that we use. I think in the future we will not do that because it creates a confusion that you've just expressed.
Yes, because I would very much like to know, is discrimination going down because of our investment, or is it going up? Is it going up because now people are more comfortable with actually complaining? I would love to have more information about just what are the outcomes that we're getting and what changes we will need to make sure that people aren't suffering from that level of discrimination. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good, thank you, Kim. Is there any public testimony on this item, Carla?
Yes, we have one person signed up,
Great.
Shedrick J. Wilkins.
Wonderful. 3 minutes, please, name for the record.
I'm Shedrick J. Wilkins, and I may become a member of the Urban League. I support this. My only comment about the Urban League is it's on Russell Street where my ex-wife and daughter live. And on the east side, there's a picture of African-American, mostly, are people who support civil rights. So I told my daughter, she's 22, she's getting active in politics. She's in there. She's a cancer survivor, by the way, at the age of 1. But she's like me. She's getting like politics. So I said, "Come, look at all these pictures on the wall there." And I go, "Well, there's Martin Luther King, Nobel Prize in 1964. There's Nelson Mandela, Nobel Prize in 1990. Who won a Nobel Prize whose picture's not up there?" She said, "Barack Obama, who won a Nobel Prize, Peace Prize in 2009. I will join and mention that they should put his picture up there. He's not elected. Another thing, too, there's another joke I have, is in September of 2017, after 10 months of President Trump, I went up to the Multnomah County Democratic Party and asked them, how come President Obama can't run for a third term? And I would have Obama button on my collar. He had no scandals. This is not Bill Clinton. Michelle was a great first lady, Nobel Prize 2009, and he could not run for a third term. It's funny how Putin can run for 3 or 4 terms, but he can only serve 10 years. So I will join the Urban League. I will ask that question, and I certainly don't want President Trump reelected.
Thank you. And Antoinette Edwards, formerly of the Office of Youth Violence Prevention, is also on that wall. All right, very good. This is a, Commissioner Udaley, do you have a question? This is an emergency ordinance. Carla, could you please call the roll?
Fritz.
Thank you for your work. Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaley.
I want to take a moment to highlight the vital work the Housing Bureau is doing to ensure services reach historically underserved communities. Through partnerships with culturally specific organizations like the Urban League of Portland and El Programa Hispano, PHB is connecting with community groups to provide service delivery and topic expertise. This approach is incredibly valuable and necessary, particularly with fair housing. I want to thank Director Callahan for working to address the problems identified in the fair housing audit, Kim McCarty from the Housing Bureau, who's led our fair housing work for years, and the teams at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, Legal Aid Services of Oregon, Urban League of Portland, and El Programa Hispano. Thank you for all your hard work. Your dedication makes what we do possible. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
Well, the goal of the contract with the Urban League Fair Housing Collaborative, of course, is to reach underserved Black and Hispanic families. And it's trying a new approach by going with culturally specific service providers who have good relationships in the community. And they'll have what I believe is an exceptional ability to support families who believe they may be facing housing discrimination. So I support this concept, I support the increased funding, and I will very much look forward to seeing positive results. I vote aye, the ordinance is adopted. Thank you all for being here for that. Next item is a second reading again. This is item 140.
Establish a heavy vehicle use tax to fund Portland's street repair and traffic safety program.
Colleagues, any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz?
So I acknowledge and appreciate the Portland Freight Committee working with the city to identify the high priority projects, and we realize how much they care about safety. We are recognizing the balance of federal, state, and local funds. The passage of this ordinance reaffirms Portland's support for ensuring that heavyweight trucks pay their fair share. Very small number of very large companies pay the bulk of the tax, and I appreciate Commissioner Udaly and her staff for getting us that information after the testimony last week. Very few companies are paying the tens of thousands, in fact.
None of them are.
Right, they're not paying, thank you. They're not paying tens of thousands, they're paying an annual $48,900, and it's based on income. So it's entirely reasonable to have those who are the biggest companies paying their fair share. And I'm very happy that we have restored the rate so that the gas tax, which went to the voters last week, and this are definitely part of the package. Aye.
Hardesty?
I'm very grateful to Commissioner Udaly's office and her staff for actually following up with me after our last testimony. I did have concern about what we had heard in this chamber about the enormous costs to truckers. I found out that information was not exactly accurate. And I am very happy to vote in favor of renewing this tax. I vote aye.
Udaly?
The heavy vehicle use tax gives us some of the resources we need to deliver on pavement maintenance work that the freight community has asked us to prioritize. Considering those maintenance needs are in part due to the use of those roads by heavy vehicles, asking heavy vehicles to contribute a fair share, which is approximately 13% of the cost based on a respected methodology used by the state of Oregon, is the right thing to do. The vast majority of companies pay less than $65 per month. There is an appeals process for companies that have a very low impact on Portland streets. Moving forward, we are committed to making sure that the program is more efficient and balanced. I do want to note that I reached out to Commissioner Novick during the last hearing because I was overwhelmed by some of the confusing information that was given in testimony. And I asked him if this fee was intended to expire in 4 years, and I will paraphrase him, he said that while the tax expires in 4 years, we created it to be parallel to the gas tax. The fair share principle certainly does not expire, and it was never intended to be temporary. So I want to thank you to everyone who contributed comments, to my colleagues and to my colleagues for their active engagement, and a really big thank you to PBOT staff who work hard every day to deliver on our commitments. It's challenging to strike the right balance between needs, wants, modes of transportation, and the wide variety of opinions about how to best achieve equitable outcomes for all users of the right-of-way. In this case, I believe we've got it right. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
I've kept an open mind on this, and I want to thank Commissioner Udaly and her staff and all the good folks at Peabody who work really, really hard on these issues. This is obviously a high-intensity issue when it comes to the truckers in our community, and I appreciate that we have our good folks, hardworking folks, smart folks on our Freight Advisory Committee, and I appreciate the input they provided. At the end of the day, I'm persuaded this is the right way to go, and I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, also a second reading, 141.
Extend contract with Calais America, Inc. for multi-space parking pay stations through April 23, 2025 for continued operations, additional door upgrades, system expansion, and provide for area permit program online permits for $16,164,000 for a 10-year total not to exceed $31,039,000.
Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Well, thanks again to Commissioner Udaly and her staff, particularly Chris Ames, the Parking Operations Division Manager. Very interesting presentation last week. And thanks to Mi-Sung Kwan on my staff, who guides me on all things transportation. Aye.
Hardesty? Aye. Udaly?
Just a reminder, this is a final contract extension for 5 years, and PBOT will begin a new RFP process before this extension expires in 2025. I appreciate all of the discussion and questions from my colleagues and the responsiveness of our city staff. Thank you to Lester Spittler in procurement and Chris Arms in PBOT for their work on this. I vote aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, 142, second reading.
Extend contract with Central Parking System of Washington, Inc. through March 31, 2021 for parking garage management services.
This is a second reading. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Fritz?
Thanks to Michael Jacobs, the Smart Park General Manager, and to the operations of the Smart Park. I find them very helpful. Aye.
Hardesty? Aye. Udaly?
This is also a final contract extension for 1 year, and PBOT will begin a new RFP process this spring. I vote aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. We're adjourned till 2 p.m.
Oh my gosh,